Committee on Foreign Affairs will come to order. Ask somebody to rise and join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Hoorah. As we open this hearing to outline maximum pressure on Iran, I'm going to deliver just a short message before I pass this gavel off to Mr. Lawler, who will actually be chairing this hearing, as he has a keen interest in the issues, as all of us do, and a firm knowledge in everything that we are about to discuss. And because I stole this hearing from him, he was going to do it at the subcommittee level. I thought it would only be right that he chair this committee, and so he will be doing that. But the message that I wish to deliver is this, and it's simply to Ayatollah Khamenei. And I would deliver this to you. President Trump will work with you to peacefully end your nuclear weapons and ballistic missile program, or President Trump will destroy your nuclear weapons and ballistic missile program. You get to choose the remedy, Ayatollah. I now pass the gavel to Mr. Lawler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The purpose of this hearing is to explore policy options to effectively curtail Iran's illicit revenue streams and address the nexus with Iran's malign activities, particularly relating to its sponsorship of terror, proxies, and nuclear weapons program. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Good afternoon, and again, thank you, Chairman Mass, for putting on this hearing, and to Ranking Member Meeks for presiding today. I also want to thank our witnesses for their expertise and their attention to this pressing matter. When President Trump left office over 4 years ago, the Iranian regime and its terror proxies were on their heels. The Trump administration's maximum pressure policy had devastated Iran's economy and denied the regime access to critical resources. Diplomatically, Iran was cornered and isolated like never before. The Abraham Accords saw Israel normalize relations with 3 Arab nations. It was a direct blow to Iran's influence and put the Middle East on a path towards unity against Tehran's aggression. Militarily, the message was unmistakable. The United States would not flinch. The decisive strike that took out Soleimani, Iran's mastermind of its terror proxies, crushed Iran's confidence and deterred provocations. By 2021, the Middle East stood on the brink of a new era of peace and stability. Iran was contained, its proxies weakened, and the region almost freed from the looming threat of Iranian terror. Enter Joe Biden. President Biden desperately tried to revive a dead nuclear deal with Iran. Even as the regime continued to expand its nuclear program in violation of its non-proliferation treaty-related obligations, the Biden administration pursued deals that would have provided the regime with sanctions relief while also allowing it to continue to expand its enrichment capabilities, including with support from Russia. And when the Biden administration came up short on a nuclear deal, it pursued a misguided $6 billion giveaway to Iran. And less than 2 months later, Hamas, with support from Iran, launched the heinous October 7th terrorist attack on Israel. Under the last administration, we occasionally heard tough language, but that was rarely backed up with concrete action. This lack of resolve emboldened Iran and its proxies, offering them a free hand to escalate attacks against the U.S. and its partners and allies with few, if any, consequences. Under the Biden administration, Iran, China, and Russia joined forces to form an unholy alliance aimed at destabilizing the free world. Yet even as Iranian missiles and drones were targeting Israel, fueling Putin's illegal war of aggression against Ukraine and being used to threaten U.S. service members, the Biden administration did little to prevent the lapse of the UN's missile embargo on Iran in October 23. As a result, Iran now has a free hand to proliferate its missiles and long-range drones unchecked. Joe Biden's foreign policy decisions in the Middle East were ill-conceived, disorganized, and at times fatal, including for U.S. service members, as we tragically saw at Tower 22 in Jordan. And in the end, he left the world more volatile and less safe than he found it. It's clear that the Biden administration's blatant refusal to enforce sanctions against Iran contributed to instability across the region and the globe. Under his administration, we witnessed an unprecedented trade in illicit oil between Iran and China, opening a lifeline for the IRGC to fund its malign activities. And it didn't work. Appeasing terrorists does not work. And that is why I'm pleased that President Trump has since put U.S. policy towards Iran back on track, restoring the much-needed and most effective maximum pressure campaign. Since taking office just over 2 months ago, the Trump administration has made great strides to implement an aggressive and comprehensive Iran policy that restores much-needed deterrence. This is a welcome change from the days of hand-wringing we saw under President Biden, whose policy towards Iran was all carrots and no sticks. The strategy now is to execute the maximum pressure campaign and deny the regime every ounce of grace given to them by the Biden administration. As part of this strategy, we must clamp down on the Iranian oil trade. Last year, Iran made over $50 billion from its illicit oil trade, much of which is controlled by its Revolutionary Guard Corps. As part of the maximum pressure, we must fully enforce existing sanctions to stop this illicit oil trade, specifically cutting off Iran's oil trade with China, which accounts for roughly 90% of oil exports. We must also take all available steps to stop Iran from ever obtaining a nuclear weapon. A nuclear Iran is not an option, and the safety of the American people and everything we love is dependent on our success here. One way or another, Iran's nuclear ambitions are finished. And once Iran loses hope for nuclear capacity, and we've decimated their bank accounts, with the halt of the oil trade, they won't be able to fund terror proxies any longer. President Trump's support for Israel in the war against Iran-backed terror is absolute, and I hope to see other partners in the region step up their commitment to working with the U.S. and Israel to address this shared threat, to ensure Iran no longer threatens our security or that of the free world. As this hearing will demonstrate, there are a number of measures that can and should be taken, and I look forward to exploring that with our witnesses today and seeing the path forward. I now recognize Ranking Member Meeks for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Lawler. I want to thank Chairman Mass for calling this timely hearing. And thank you to all of our witnesses for joining us this afternoon. There is strong bipartisan understanding on this committee regarding the threat posed by the government of Iran, the world's foremost state sponsor of terrorism, and how it threatens the United States, Israel, the broader Middle East, and the entire globe. And with our quality panel, I know we will leave this hearing better informed on various aspects of the Iranian threat, ranging from its illicit nuclear program to support of terrorist proxies. We are living in a dangerous time when it comes to Iran. Over the last year, we've seen Iranian proxies attempt to destroy Israel. Hundreds of ballistic missiles and drones launched by Iran threatened Israeli and Palestinians alike. The United States Armed Forces have been targeted in hundreds of Iranian-sponsored attacks. An Iranian proxy has crippled shipping through the Red Sea and directly targeted the U.S. Navy in international waters. Iranian drones are aiding Vladimir Putin in his illegal and brutal war on Ukraine. And China continues to purchase Iranian oil in the face of U.S. sanctions. We know, based upon public reports, though, that Iran is now closer than ever to having a nuclear weapons capability. Now, during the time of the JCPOA agreement, Iran was verifiably at least a year away from having enough highly enriched uranium for a single bomb. But As a result of the Trump administration, because he was the president before Biden, as a result of him abandoning that agreement, Iran is now only days away from having enough highly enriched uranium for many bombs. By every measure, we are less safe today because we left the JCPOA than we were while we were in that agreement. We are now reading press reports that Prime Minister Netanyahu is planning a potential military strike on Iranian nuclear infrastructure as soon as this month. And reporting indicates that Mr. Netanyahu is aggressively lobbying President Trump to support such a strike. A military strike on Iran is no easy task, not a sure thing, and comes with significant risk of escalating into a destructive regional conflict. It is unlikely to deter Iran's nuclear weapons aspirations for a significant period of time and could have an enormous impact on regional security, as well as the United States and global economies. And you may have noticed that the U.S. economy is already facing troubling volatility as a result of the president's reckless threats of tariffs. Rattling energy markets, disturbing trade routes, and unleashing additional regional instability is not something to be taken lightly. So no military solution will permanently deny Iran the bomb, nor will it usher in a democratic Iranian government. That's pure fantasy. Like most observers of Iran, I'm acutely certain both the Iranian and American people would be better served by Iranian leadership who respect human rights at home and peace abroad. And I hope we can protect foreign assistance efforts that support the Iranian people from further arbitrary cuts. We know Iranians do not broadly support their corrupt, theocratic government that abuses women and minorities and wastes Iran's financial resources supporting terrorists that undermine their own security and bring to no benefit and of no benefit to the Iranian people. Despite all these serious challenges, solutions are not impossible. I will always argue that diplomacy must always be kept on the table alongside credible threats. Diplomacy may not solve all of our challenges with Iran, but direct engagement with Iran has proven successful in lowering tensions and addressing the nuclear program, the main issue of concern. President Trump was right to send a letter to Iranian leaders opening the door to diplomatic engagement. We must encourage this effort and utilize all means of American power to address Iranian threats and to do so in lockstep with our allies. We should be involving our allies and bringing them in closer for this effort, not push them away. We have three excellent witnesses with us today to help think through the challenges before us. This is an excellent panel to assess the threats posed by Iran and help us formulate appropriate responses to keep the United States and our friends and allies safe. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Meeks. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today on this important topic. Mr. Norman T. Roule, non-resident senior advisor, Warfare, Irregular Threats, and Terrorism Program, the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Ms. Claire Jungman, Chief of Staff, United Against Nuclear Iran, and Ms. Dana Stroul, Director of Research and Shelly and Michael Kassen, Senior Fellow, the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. This committee recognizes the importance of the issues before us and is grateful to have you here to speak with us today. Your full statements will be made part of the record, and I'll ask each of you to keep your spoken remarks to 5 minutes in order to allow more time for member questions. I now recognize Mr. Roule for his opening statement.
Chair Lawler, Ranking Member Meeks, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear today. I will make brief comments and, with your concurrence, submit a statement for the record. For over 2 decades, Iran has used its nuclear program and regional militias as its primary tools of power projection. Tehran's role in the deaths of hundreds of Americans and tens of thousands of citizens in the Middle East is routinely acknowledged. Iran's missiles and drones kill Ukrainians and threaten global shipping in the Red Sea. But it has evaded meaningful consequences, in part due to Western concerns that it would respond to significant retaliation by undertaking the final steps to acquire a nuclear weapon. These aggressive policies gradually have become entwined as Iran's malign sword and shield of its foreign policy. Recent seismic changes in the region give us an unprecedented opportunity to deal with these challenges. Despite the intelligence community's assessment that Iran is not undertaking nuclear weaponization, recent reports by the International Atomic Energy Agency are alarming. Tehran has built a nuclear program which has no justifiable civilian purpose. Iran now appears capable of producing its first quantity of 90% enriched uranium, sufficient for one nuclear weapon, in about a week. Tehran's current stockpile of 60% enriched uranium is sufficient for about 7 nuclear weapons. Assuming use of Iran's entire stock of enriched uranium and centrifuge capacity, some experts believe Iran could produce fissile material sufficient for approximately 10 nuclear weapons in a month. Let those numbers sink in. Tehran has also increased the number and sophistication of its centrifuge cascades, allowing for rapid weaponization when it so chooses. Iran routinely hampers IAEA efforts to verify its nuclear program, which, absent solid intelligence, reduces confidence in detecting any diversion of nuclear material or equipment to any possible covert weapons program. In short, Iran looks like a country building a nuclear weapons program, albeit one yet to make the final steps required, because it either fears discovery and the subsequent military consequences, or believes its current approach offers diplomatic advantages beyond those found in possession of an actual nuclear weapon. Its long-range ballistic missile program appears to be following a similar path. Turning to Tehran's proxy network, Israeli and ongoing U.S. military actions have severely weakened its proxies in Lebanon, Gaza, Syria, and Yemen, but these groups survive along with its other partners in the region. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force aims to revive these groups, including in the Red Sea region, where its strategy involves securing naval access via Sudan, where it likely hopes to establish weapons transshipment and militant training centers in East Africa to threaten the Arabian Peninsula, Israel, and the Eastern Mediterranean. Iran's proxy operations remain vulnerable, however, to pressure on their logistics, finances, and personnel. Diplomatic and economic sanctions are important, although Europe's actions here have been insufficient. The U.S. needs to make it clear to Iran that if the Quds Force operates as a terrorist organization, its personnel and logistics will be targeted accordingly, including by our military assets. Yemen presents an opportunity to demonstrate this decision. Tehran recognizes its unprecedented vulnerability to external military threats, particularly after Israel's October 2024 strikes demonstrated the ineffectiveness of their air defenses. The Israeli strikes and Iran's failed counterattacks also showed the potency of U.S. military technology and our regional partnerships. Domestically, Iran faces severe economic and political challenges which exceed its policy capabilities. Millions of Iranians have fallen into poverty in recent years. Inflation hovers at 35%. The return of maximum pressure sanctions campaign has accelerated the collapse of Iran's currency against the dollar. The regime now appears to resemble like the late Soviet Union, holding power through coercion and stale ideology. Between 2002 and 2003, and then between 2013 and 2014, Iran navigated similar Western military threats, regional instability, and domestic discontent by blending belligerent rhetoric with lengthy diplomatic talks designed to soften sanctions. Tehran avoided actions which could have sparked a conventional war with the U.S. This strategy led to the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. This deal committed Tehran to potentially reversible nuclear concessions in exchange for long-term or permanent sanctions relief that it used to sustain the regime and resource its regional militias and missile program. We and our partners must use this period to foster a debate that leads to the abandonment of regional adventurism and a pursuit of a nuclear weapon. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to your comments and questions.
Thank you, Mr. Roule. I now recognize Ms. Jungman for her opening statement.
Chairman Lawler, Ranking Member Meeks, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. The topic of this hearing and disrupting Iran's malign behavior is a matter of urgent national security. At the heart of Iran's malign behavior is its oil sector. Despite U.S. sanctions, Iran continues to export over 1.5 million barrels of oil per day, earning tens of billions of dollars annually. These revenues are not just supporting Iran's economy, they are directly funding terrorism, nuclear escalation, and regional destabilization. That's because up to half of Iran's oil exports are now controlled by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC. This means that every barrel of Iranian oil sold on the black market strengthens the IRGC's hand, bankrolling groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, underwriting weapons development, and fueling nuclear expansion. We've seen the consequences. Iran-backed militants have launched attacks across the region, emboldened by the financial cushion that oil exports have provided. New enforcement actions in late 2024, including designations on nearly 50 tankers and sanctions on Chinese refiners, have started to make an impact. Iran's oil exports have dipped, and its access to hard currency is beginning to tighten. But this campaign must continue and expand. The goal should be to drive Iran's oil revenues as close to zero as possible, cutting off the financial oxygen that allows the regime to operate abroad and repress at home. Beyond oil, Iran is increasingly turning to other illicit revenue streams: crypto mining and laundering, shadow banking networks, dollar smuggling from Iraq, and barter trade with Russia and Syria. These activities are harder to track, but deeply dangerous. In total, we estimate Iran has generated over $100 billion in oil revenue since 2021, and additional billions through crypto and smuggling networks. These funds have empowered its proxies and enabled nuclear brinksmanship, but sanctions can still work. When properly enforced, they limit Iran's budget, disrupt its ability to pay militias, and increase the costs of escalation. To that end, I offer a few recommendations. First, continue aggressive enforcement against Iran's ghost fleet and shipping facilitators. Sanction every vessel, registry, insurer, captain, and port that helps move Iranian oil. Second, target foreign enablers, especially in China and Malaysia, who knowingly buy or store Iranian crude. Third, expand maritime interdictions and use AI tools to identify suspicious tanker behavior in real time. Each vessel seized directly cuts into Iran's revenue and deters further evasion. Fourth, establish a multilateral task force modeled on the Russian sanctions coordination effort to enable real-time intelligence sharing on Iranian oil smuggling, front companies, and crypto laundering. Unified action will help close off evasion pathways faster and more effectively. Fifth, strengthen crypto enforcement by tracing wallets linked to Iran and sanctioning mining operations. And finally, Congress should ensure that secondary sanctions remain a powerful deterrent, holding accountable any foreign entity that transacts with the IRGC or its proxies. In closing, the United States must send a clear message. Iran cannot continue to fund terrorism, threaten its neighbors, and defy nuclear commitments without consequences. We must remain united, vigilant, and unyielding in our pursuit of financial pressure, because cutting off the money is our best tool to constrain Iran's most dangerous activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jungman. I now recognize Ms. Stroul for her opening statement.
Chairman Lawler, Ranking Member Meeks, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. Let me associate myself with Mr. Roule. The Iranian regime is on its back foot. The pillars of its security strategy, the nuclear weapons program, the network of terrorists and proxies, and the conventional missile and drone arsenal are more vulnerable today than at any time in the history of the regime, making 2025 a decisive year. In the aftermath of Hamas's attack, Israel, with U.S. support, dismantled Iran's proxy network in Gaza, Lebanon, and elsewhere, disrupting the regime's ability to project power through asymmetric capabilities. In Syria, Tehran lost its regional strategic partner with the ouster of Bashar al-Assad, who permitted the use of Syrian territory for Iranian terror. From the validation of a U.S.-led regional air defense coalition in April of last year, to Israel's defeat of a large-scale ballistic missile attack last October, we now know that Iran's complex conventional attacks and missile threats can be defeated. Israel's strikes inside Iran targeted key missile production facilities and degraded its strategic air defense systems. In addition, the regime is under economic and social pressure. The sanctions architecture from the 2019 maximum pressure campaign remains in place and has been strengthened. The window is open for the U.S. to work with its partners and advance opportunities in a region no longer held back by Iran's nefarious influence. To emphasize, this is a window of opportunity. How the U.S. proceeds in the coming months will determine whether a more stable and secure region emerges from the post-October 7th environment. In the coming months, the administration should test Tehran's willingness to reach a diplomatic agreement while also preparing to set the nuclear weapons program back through military means. A good deal, as National Security Advisor Waltz emphasized, would be one that permanently blocks Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon rather than just delaying its capability. Yet the time window to test Iran's openness to negotiate is short, partly due to the looming October expiration of remaining UN Security Council restrictions and also because of Iran's current exposure to military strikes. Policymakers should assume that Russia and China will help Iran rebuild its military capacity and air defenses. Moscow and Beijing are already supporting Tehran diplomatically, so Washington will need to prepare for a complex negotiation in which these powers do not contribute to a diplomatic process like they did as part of the P5+1. The following steps will strengthen the U.S. hand as it pursues a negotiated settlement. The administration can incentivize Iran to negotiate by articulating how sanctions relief would be structured if Iran dismantles its nuclear weapons program. The administration must keep its military options open by maintaining a robust U.S. military posture in the region, strengthening regional air and missile defense capabilities, and reinforcing America's commitment to deterring Iranian aggression against Israel and Arab allies. Congress can begin the process to conditionally authorize the use of military force against Iran's nuclear program if the regime proves unwilling to quickly take sufficient steps. Consultations with allies and partners, particularly in the Middle East and Europe, will ensure a unified approach to countering Iran, reinforce the legitimacy of any negotiated settlement, and maintain pressure on Tehran. This will be crucial to blunting spoiler policies from Russia and China. Engaging regional leaders is also essential for preventing Iran from reconstituting its threat network. Providing military assistance and intelligence sharing to partners will enhance their ability to counter Iran. Restoring assistance to emerging leaders while pressing for reforms, particularly in Lebanon and Syria, can further incentivize cooperation, ensuring they remain resilient against a malign Iranian influence. In Yemen, the administration should ensure that its current air campaign exclusively targets military assets of the Houthis and mitigates civilian harm, while seeking ways to support the Yemeni people. Increasing maritime and overland interdiction efforts will prevent Iran from resupplying the Houthis. Additionally, working closely with the Saudis and Emiratis on a political process aimed at ending Yemen's civil war will create a pathway for peace and stability. In conclusion, real opportunities exist to block Iran from pursuing a nuclear weapons capability and consolidate military gains against its destabilizing activities. To press the advantage, the U.S. must be prepared to bring more to the table. Military force and sanctions are critical elements of strategy, but insufficient on their own. The United States must lean into diplomacy as well, testing the possibility of a negotiated settlement while supporting new leaders across the region that oppose Tehran's interest in rebuilding its axis of resistance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stroul. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Last year, two of my bills that became law targeted Iran's oil trade. The SHIP Act gave the president the authority to sanction foreign ports and refineries that process illicit Iranian oil, and the Iran-China Energy Sanctions Act allowed for sanctions against Chinese financial institutions that process transactions involving Iranian oil. And I'm currently working on legislation that further expands sanctions authority, the Iran Enhanced Sanctions Act. Anyone or any entity that knowingly facilitates the Iranian oil trade will be found and cut off until they are no longer doing so. Ms. Jungman, just over a week ago, the president sanctioned the Luqing refinery in China under the SHIP Act authorities. Have we seen any impact since this recent designation? And do you believe this designation and the Trump administration's clear intent to enforce more of these types of sanctions may deter other refineries from continuing to accept Iranian oil?
Chairman Lawler, thank you for your question, and thank you for your work on the SHIP Act and associated acts. I do think that the first designations here on this refinery, it's still a little bit too soon to see an impact, given that it was only a week or so ago. But we need more of these. One refinery designated doesn't have a big impact. Iran's going to move its oil to be offloaded at another refinery. We need to continue the pressure. We need to continue the designations on the refineries, and it shouldn't be piecemeal. It needs to all happen at once in order to really cut the lifeline.
Last week, reporting indicated that U.S. naval forces stopped a group of oil tankers in the Gulf. While originally thought to be of Iraqi origin, they were found to be using forged Iraqi documents, and the tankers were Iranian. This instance really raises the larger issue of this being a consistent problem in the Gulf. So what do you believe we are doing now to stop vessels from obscuring their origin? And how are our allies and strategic partner countries like Iraq helping us, and what more can be done?
Unfortunately, I don't think our strategic partners are doing enough here. I think we need to have more diplomatic engagement with them and encourage them to try to stop these associated activities. We see Malaysia, Singapore, Iraq, Oman. These are all serving as hubs for Iran to blend its oil, rebrand its oil, and again, continue the lifeline of the oil to be exported. So we need to continue pressure on them and encourage more diplomatic efforts from them.
Mr. Roule, you mentioned in your opening statement that it's important to demonstrate the credibility of a U.S. military offensive should Iran undertake nuclear weaponization in the future. What alternatives to diplomacy would you recommend in attempting to constrain Iran's nuclear program, and what other factors need to be considered before any decision is made to pursue one of these?
Diplomacy, of course, should remain our primary route, and the President has appropriately made this the forefront of his approach to the Iranians and engagement with our partners. The Iranians must understand if they complete the final steps that we will take that military final approach as well. There needs to be more action done to prevent Iran from acquiring the materiel they need to complete those last steps. And we need to make sure that our partners who are providing that equipment, the Chinese, maybe Europeans, shipping lines, are punished severely as they move that material. But in the end of the day, Iran has pretty much everything it needs to complete those last steps for its nuclear program. Unfortunately, the can has been kicked down the road for many years, and we're at the end of the road. So it's up to the Iranians to take those last steps, and they either come to a deal where they must face nuclear reaction, response, military response.
So given that the can has been kicked down the road, what factors, in your estimation, need to be considered before any decision is made to pursue a non-diplomatic response?
The location of the nuclear material. The IAEA has lost track of some aspects of Iran's program because Iran no longer provides full access to its production of centrifuge equipment. We need to make sure we understand exactly where all Iran's sites are located so that Iran simply doesn't reproduce its program in an alternative facility. And in the end, even if there is a military strike, sir, we've got to make sure the Iranians understand our intent in the long term is to prevent reconstruction, or simply we're going to be going in and repeating the process. So it's got to be an international approach that says, with the U.S. and its partners, we are not going to tolerate Iran building a nuclear weapon.
Thank you. I now recognize Ranking Member Meeks for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Ms. Stroul, let me just go to you first. Thank you for your service to our country. You know, I said in my opening remarks that there's more to be done to try to bring Iran and the U.S. To the table to negotiate the core issues of concern here, which is Iran's nuclear program, because of that tough environment. But I also believe that, you know, when I look at it thus far, Iran's response has been that they reject direct talks with the United States, but has left the door open to multilateral diplomacy. And what was important for me at the time of negotiating the JCPOA was that it was a multilateral agreement. There was things that were going on and negotiated that our allies wanted. That's how we got the agreement, because we figured it wouldn't be just us by ourselves. So as Mr. Roule just said, getting them in so that we could box Iran in, because it's not just the United States, it's the United States and our allies, well, which I think is important. And then also, I think some credibility has been gone from the United States when we unilaterally pulled out and the other allies stayed in and wanted to work something together. So there's a lack of trust that then develops, you know, in that regards on both sides. So how do you think we could build some confidence with our adversary, Iran, so that we can begin negotiations? And how do we bring back a diplomatic track with our allies? So we're not by ourselves. I think Mr. Roule just talked about how significant and important that is. How do you think that we can do that?
Thank you so much for this question. I couldn't agree with you more that we have seen in the past, Iran has been willing to negotiate when it feels diplomatic isolation coupled with economic pressure and the threat of military force. Right now, we have tremendous sanctions pressure, and I believe there is a credible threat of military force on the table, and there is a unilateral offer to negotiate from President Trump, but what is missing is this multilateral element. So first of all, there is an eagerness in some of our previous partners from the P5+1, specifically in Europe, to begin coordinating with Washington as soon as possible ahead of this deadline in October later this year, when the remaining restrictions on Iran's nuclear program expire. Our European allies, and they are still our allies, are very interested in aligning with us in order to have a unified front approaching Iran. Secondly, we have been using and relying on partners in the Middle East to pass messages to Iran and receive messages from Iran, and I think that's very important. But our partners in the Middle East also need to have confidence that if the Iranians lash out and threaten them or use military force against them, like we saw in the 2015 Abqaiq situation, that Washington is going to have their back and be willing to put security guarantees on the table and support their defense, just as the United States has done for Israel in supporting its defense. So one is clarifying our commitment to our partners' defense. Two is making a meaningful and genuine effort to include them and consult with them on these talks. That will also strengthen any negotiation on the other side.
Thank you. And I address this to you again, Ms. Stroul and Mr. Roule. You know, hopefully we'll have time to get both of you. You know, could you maybe tell us about the challenges that it would be in setting back the Iranian nuclear program militarily? You know, what would there be any challenges? Are there challenges there, Mr. Roule, Ms. Stroul?
I'll try to do 20 seconds and hand it over to Mr. Roule. So the greatest challenge is that you cannot bomb away knowledge. Iran has mastered the cycle of nuclear fuel enrichment, and we know, based on intelligence community reporting in an unclassified manner, that they are undertaking the activities to position themselves to go across the threshold and weaponize should the Supreme Leader make the decision to do so. So we are at a perilous moment. Their nuclear program is geographically diverse. Some of it is above ground, some of it is buried deeply underground. This means it's not a one-night military campaign. We are talking about a serious campaign to set back a program in order to then buy time to negotiate or figure out what steps would happen on the other side of military action. It's a serious piece of business.
I think my time has expired.
Thank you to the ranking member. I now recognize for 5 minutes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here today. What an important topic as we face the threat from Iran. And to me, the regime in Tehran is very clear. They believe death to Israel, death to America. They believe that by developing a nuclear capability that would be as essential to Israel, it'd be as essential to the United States, particularly as they develop an ICBM capability, which can only have one purpose, and that is to deliver a nuclear attack on the American people. And so over and over again, I'm so grateful for the leadership of Donald Trump to let the dictatorship in Tehran know that they should not develop a nuclear capability and a nuclear bomb, and it should not be developed. And then we need to get to, if it's ever determined they're not, there must be actual verification, not some charade of determining whether it's been stopped or not. And so I have absolute faith, and I'm really grateful for Chairman Mass to bring up, indeed, that we need to do all we can to stop the financing of the dictatorship, with it being revealed that 90% of the oil and gas being sold goes to the Chinese Communist Party. Let's connect the dots. And then we connect another dot, and I was very grateful for President Donald Trump over the weekend to identify the dots that are connected between war criminal Putin and the sale of oil to maintain his dictatorship and the call for secondary sanctions. These would be secondary sanctions that would be against allies, not against, but working with allies of the United States, that they should be part of sanctions. So over and over again, we're in a situation as we face the malign influence, the topic today, we have a circumstance that's so clear to me, and that is that we're involved in a war we did not choose, and that is dictators with rule of gun invading democracies with rule of law. It began February 24, 2022. With the invasion of Ukraine. Then October 7, 2023, the puppets of Iran, Hamas, invading Israel. And then over and over again, we just need to be working together. And with that in mind, I would like each of you, but in particular, Mr. Roule, the issue of sanctions. What more sanctions can we have? And I want you to know that, that many of my colleagues here, that we've introduced a number of bills today. The Maximum Support Act, bipartisan with Congressman Jimmy Panetta. We also have the Free Iraq from Iran Act. I had two of my sons serve in Iraq to liberate Iraq. We didn't mean for it to be liberated for Iran to come in with militias to control the country. And so that needs to be achieved. And then I'm really grateful that we've got legislation pending, and I need people really smart like Congressman Huizenga to be part of this, and that is the address the network of Hezbollah here in the Western Hemisphere, working with drug cartels. With all of that, what can we do in terms of sanctions to help the people of Iran, not the dictatorship?
Superb question, sir. Very quickly, any legislation should ensure that we as loudly and as clearly say that the Iranian people can obtain food and medicine from the United States and elsewhere. because their own government's corruption and inefficiency prevents them from doing so, to include during COVID, where over $1 billion of corruption cost them medicine that they so desperately needed. I would say that when anything that could be done to deny the Quds Force resources, because that goes directly to terrorism in the homeland, and supporting proxies overseas who are attempting to kill Americans and individuals in the region, is important. Thank you.
And Ms. Jungman, indeed, the tanker tracking is so important. And we're talking about ghost ships of war criminal Putin. We're talking about refineries of the Chinese Communist Party over and over again. So how is this being processed? And again, President Trump's made every effort and has made clear he's going to act.
Thank you for the question. I think it's important to remember that the revenue Iran accumulates from its oil sales is not revenue going back to the people of Iran. This revenue is going into the regime's pockets. And I think it's also important to remember that the maritime industry is a large industry. There's a number of Western touch points that these vessels have that can be sanctioned or you can threaten sanctions on. For example, the classification societies. Essentially, every vessel needs to have a safety certificate, which is given from a classification society, to ensure that it's safe to sail the seas. Without that classification certificate, a vessel cannot sail into a port. We have yet to see any sanctions on these classification societies, flag registries as well, and insurance companies.
And my time is up. I yield back with, hey, thank you for your insight. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I now recognize for 5 minutes the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman.
What we learned early this century is that just an American leader pounding the table, as several did, and say this country will not be allowed to have nuclear weapons is not exactly effective. That's why I was here saw several presidents make that declaration with regard to North Korea, and now North Korea has scores of nuclear weapons. I'm going to ask our witnesses to give us an answer in writing about North Korea, because 20 years ago, North Korea provided not nuclear weapons to Syria, but the technology to build them. The reason for that is North Korea didn't have a surplus of nuclear weapons at the time, didn't want to give up their nuclear weapons, but they're happy to have Syria have nuclear weapons and to make some money off of it. So I'd like each of our witnesses for the record to detail ideas on what we do to prevent Iran from buying a nuclear weapon from North Korea, which today does not have a surplus of money and does have a surplus of nuclear weapons. And in particular, I'd like you to address what steps we could take to force China to agree, at least privately, that no plane would be allowed to go directly from North Korea to Iran without stopping for inspection. I might add that I discussed this with President Obama in the Oval Office long ago and was unable to, and while he pointed out to me that we intercept certain ships leaving North Korea, he was unwilling to take action to prevent direct plane flights. At least he didn't think it was a good idea at the time. The Masa Act, named after Masa Amini, who was brutally murdered by the Iranian regime, directed the administration to make targeted sanctions determinations on senior officials in the Iranian regime. Ms. Stroul, what can the administration do to better utilize those authorities and go after particular individuals responsible for human rights deprivations in Iran?
Well, thank you for that question, Congressman. The administration should certainly make use of the authorities granted to it by Congress in the Masa Act and continue to shine a light and impose.
Any particular individuals you'd want to name today?
I don't have particular individuals. I don't know.
Add them for the record, and I'll ask our other witnesses to do that. But I'll point out, our other witnesses have pointed out that you can't bomb knowledge away, that even an agreement with Iran is valid only so long as they adhere to it. Nothing will permanently prevent the Islamic Republic of Iran from having a nuclear weapon except the permanent end to the Islamic Republic of Iran and the creation of a truly democratic Iranian government. I and therefore shocked that the administration has eliminated all the democracy and civil society programs at Iran, all of our support for grassroots political movements, all of our support for independent media. Now, I know that USAID spent a few tens of thousands of dollars doing stupid things that don't reflect American values and certainly don't reflect our strategic needs. But we saw just yesterday the Chinese were rescuing people in Myanmar, and we did not have the capacity to save a single life in Myanmar. We sent some people recently, long after I think all the survivors would have been deceased, to go scout out the situation. That's what happens when you lose USAID. Ms. Stroul, I'd like you to focus just on the Trump years, 2017 to 2021. During those 4 years, did Iran increase its missile capacity? Yes or no?
Yes.
During those 4 years, did Iran expand its stockpile of enriched uranium?
Yes.
During those years, did Iran increase its capacity to refine uranium through banks of centrifuges?
Yes.
So, well, I hope that Trump 2.0 works better. I would also, Ms. Jungman, you brought the importance of cryptocurrency. I'd point out that our sanctions that got us in 2015 were pretty much based on our power to control international currency, because it was all dollars. The crypto enthusiasts and the leaders in that industry have said they want to take that away from the United States because they think it's illegitimate for America to have that power. Do you think that we should give up the power that we get from having the dollar being the world's reserve currency?
No, I don't think we should give up that power, but I do think that there needs to be stronger regulations and monitoring of what's being done on the crypto.
Yeah, my time has expired.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Smith, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me just ask two basic questions. You know, despite presenting itself as a U.S. partner, Azerbaijan under Aliyev, and I've met with him twice in Baku and raised human rights issues with him. And recently, obviously, he committed genocide against the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. He signed a cooperation agreement with both Iran and Russia, including a significant gas swap deal with Tehran. These actions, in my opinion, directly benefit the two regimes and the U.S. is actively working to counter. And I'm wondering what your thoughts might be on that. Secondly, if I could, Rob Malley, you know, we know that the Office of Inspector General, and I read the report, it was a good report about the fact that the State Department did not follow its own clearance guidelines. But the bigger issue is having someone who was seemingly very much in favor of Tehran's policies in such a strategic position as special envoy does raise the question what damage might have been done, has been done, and might even carry forward right into today, especially as to Tehran's perceptions of what we're all about. And do you think the FBI will ever get to the bottom of it? And if you could speak to that as well. But those two questions, if you could. Norman?
In order to restrict Iran's access to funds and to apply the appropriate diplomatic and economic pressures, it is critical that Iran not have the capacity to undertake economic deals such as it conducted with Azerbaijan, with anyone. As Ms. Stroul correctly stated, Iran is under the greatest pressure when it faces multilateral economic and diplomatic isolation, and that must be absolute. Whenever there are exceptions to that, Iran benefits, and that weakens the pressure on Iran itself. Regarding Mr. Malley, it's out of my level of competence, and I would defer to the Federal Bureau of Investigation or others. Thank you.
Would any of you want to comment on either of those two issues?
I would simply note that in the Biden administration and again in this administration, there is an aligned objective of pursuing negotiations first for a verifiable deal that blocks all Iran's pathways towards a nuclear weapon. And I think it underscores the importance of an independent and strong Inspector General in the State Department, as well as an FBI who is allowed to conduct credible and important investigations.
Claire. Do any of you have any sense as to when the FBI may reveal where it is in terms of this investigation? It seems like Malley just fell off the face of the earth, and to have someone of his special envoy in such a strategic position seems to me it would undermine what this country was all about in our dealings with Iran. Would you agree with that at least? Nobody? Okay. I do hope that we will follow up on the Azerbaijan connection. Again, I've met with a number of people who have political prisoners sitting in his horrible jails. He is so brazen that in the past, he put a stringer who was an Azerbaijani woman into jail, gave her an over 7-year prison sentence, and she worked for Radio Free Europe. So I actually convened a hearing and had the head of Radio Free Europe come and testify about how horrible it was. And what was her crime? She pointed out how corrupt Aliyev is. And now we have a situation again where he's getting into deals with a country that needs hard currency extremely hard. We know that Xi Jinping and the Communist Party, they enable dictatorship and bad actors everywhere. But this man who gets a free pass in this town, and that is Aliyev, needs to be called out. I thank you. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I now recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Keating, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Stroul mentioned how important our allies are to us in this regard, even though we did move away from them and left many of them hanging, pulling out of the JCPOA. But I want to just comment on that. First, last year, our allies did participate with a Iran proxy, the Houthis, in an attack with fighter jets, with ship-based cruise missiles, with targets like, Houthi missile launchers, air defense systems, radar, weapon systems. We worked together. The UK participated in this. Canada participated in this. Australia and the Netherlands participated in this. Well, what's happened to our allies now with the Trump administration's latest actions and talks? Deliberately irritating, and this really takes a great deal of effort, our allies, Canada, wanting to make that the 51st state, and bullying them with tariffs without negotiating the way you would with an ally. How does Canada respond? Well, Canada responded just last month with a $4.2 billion investment in cutting-edge radar with Australia, despite our geographic location in the Western Hemisphere, with Australia. And they're partaking with other European countries right now in alternative military buildup, discrete from the United States because of these actions. Denmark is part of NATO. And how are they reacting when they say they will take Greenland by force if necessary? Portugal, a NATO country, and other NATO countries, they're reconsidering buying F-35s because their fear of the U.S. control over the parts and software. These are our allies. These are people that are instrumental to our success worldwide, but also in the Middle East. And let's talk about the leaked Signal chat that was there. Our vice president saying, I just hate bailing out Europe again. And what about our Secretary of Defense saying, I fully share your loathing of European freeloading. It's pathetic. And what about Stephen Miller in that chat? They had a lot to say. And our allies were listening. He said, we have to make it clear to Egypt and Europe what we expect in return. We also need to figure out how to enforce that requirement. If they don't remunerate, then what? If the U.S. successfully restores freedom of navigation at a great cost, there needs to be further economic gain extracted from them in return. That's the signal chat. Those are the other actions, and I could go on. How can we really expect our allies to trust us on such an important issue as Iran and dealing with their malign influence throughout the Middle East if this is what they're getting in return? And we've already seen, as I've shown, some actions on their part where they're moving away from us because they can't trust us. Mr. Stroul, are we weaker without our allies side by side with us?
Thank you for that question. Certainly one of the core elements of American strength and its ability to accomplish its national security interests has been our unmatched network of allies and partners across multiple theaters. Any objective that we want to make the American people safer and our country safer is better done in coordination with allies and partners. Part of the reason we need to put in effort to align diplomatically, share burdens and resources up front is because there may be a time when we ask our allies and partners to do something that is not easy or inconvenient.
Like they did it after 9/11 in joining with us.
Absolutely,
under Article
sir.
5.
Absolutely, sir. So as we think through all of our different objectives in the Middle East, we have seen our European allies stand up as well as our partners in the Middle East. The Air Defense Coalition last April was a good example. France's leadership in Lebanon is another example. The European coordination in Syria is another example. And absolutely the both defensive presence in the Red Sea to defend against Houthi attacks and the offensive military strikes over the past year are great examples of our allies and partners putting skin in the game.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Keating. I now recognize for 5 minutes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, appreciate your time here today. Why don't we just get real about this conversation for once? Iran is a country that is run by a criminal terrorist regime. That's what Iran is. We're talking about having negotiations with them and so on and so forth. I guess we've got to. But North Korea is a criminal, essentially terrorist regime. When you look at what it does to its own citizens, it doesn't because it can't afford to export its terrorism, but Iran does and has continued to do so. And even with the fact notwithstanding that 80% of Hezbollah's drones and missiles have been taken out, Assad's regime is gone, Tehran's missile factories have been devastated, the Houthis are finally under some real fire. Iran still exists. And we're talking like there's some, well, let me ask you, you guys are the experts. Mr. Roule, is Iran going to give up its nuclear program? Have they ever shown any interest whatsoever? But before you answer that question, is there any question in anybody's mind on the panel that their nuclear program is specifically for weapons utilization? It's a weapons program. It's not for power or medical research. It's for aggressive military action. Is there any question about that? Is there any dissension from that?
Frankly, sir, the question is I think the best way of putting is Iran has a civilian nuclear program and has kept open the option for a military.
Why did they need to enrich so much for a civilian program?
Not only do they not need to enrich, it's a great question. They are now focusing the enrichment aspect of their entire nuclear program on non-civilian enrichment. So they need to enrich between 3 and 5%.
It's a weapons program.
For civilian, they're enriching at 60%, which is only military grade. In essence, they're shaping their entire civilian nuclear program to make it look as if they're aiming for a military program. It has no civilian use. This array, this architecture they're creating. That doesn't mean they've decided to make a bomb. And we've heard the DNI, Gabbard say they're not doing this, but facts are facts in that regard.
Maybe I should have added they are a lying criminal terrorist regime. Right? They lie about things. They use diplomacy to their advantage because the rest of the, to the point of the JCPOA, the rest of the world are allies. followed President Obama, who didn't want to see Iran, a nuclear Iran during his term, but didn't mind seeing one 15 years later when he was no longer the president. It didn't stop their nuclear production, their military nuclear capability. It just delayed it. That's all it did. Nobody here wants to acknowledge it. But to my other point, have they ever shown any interest whatsoever in getting rid of this nuclear program, for whatever way you want to describe it?
No, and in fact, it is.
No.
It is extremely. Their red lines have been not giving up industrial enrichment, not closing any facilities, and not giving up on R&D. And it's very unlikely they will give up on any of those red lines without significant pressure and the threat of military action. Unfortunately,
Ms. Jungman, you disagree with that?
I do not disagree.
Ms.
Completely
Stroul.
agree.
I do not disagree.
Okay, so what are we talking about here? We're talking about like we can have some conversation that's going to get them to give it up, even while we all know in the room they ain't giving it up, right? Ms. Jungman, they got, what, 300 ghost ships running around selling their oil, which is sanctioned, but they sell it to the Chinese and whoever they want. And where does that money go to the people of Iran? Look, there are probably wonderful, I'm sure there are wonderful people in Iran that don't want to live under this yoke of terrorism. But the money's not going to them, is it? It's going to who?
No, the money from Iran's oil goes right back to its terrorist proxies.
Yeah, it's terrorist proxies, the Quds Force, probably to their nuclear weapons program. Ladies and gentlemen, all we're doing is delaying the inevitable, right? Iran, we're acting like we can talk our way out of having this cancer get worse by just having the cancer kind of settle down for a little bit. There's a cancer in the Middle East. There's a cancer on the globe. The name in this case is Iran and the leadership in Iran. That's the cancer. We better get real about what we're talking about, because they're not going to give it up willingly, no matter what the negotiation is. And I just wish that we'd quit fooling around and acting like the IAEA is going to tell us something. I mean, they wouldn't even allow an American inspector on the team. They wouldn't allow inspectors to visit military sites. Who are we kidding here? I'm sorry, I didn't have any questions before I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. I now recognize for 5 minutes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Castro.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all for your testimony today. Ms. Stroul, in your testimony, you recommend that the Congress, quote, strengthen the administration's hand by beginning the process to conditionally authorize the use of military force against Iran's nuclear program if the regime proves unwilling to take sufficient steps to ensure that it will not acquire nuclear weapons. And I guess that recommendation gives me some concern based on history. This was the same argument made to justify voting for the Iraq War in 2002. In debates in the Congress, they argued that a show of resolve by Congress by preemptively authorizing the use of military force against Iraq would strengthen the Bush administration's hand in negotiations and force Saddam Hussein to come to the table. What ensued with the Iraq War was one of the biggest mistakes that our country has made in decades. And I don't think any of us, or most of us at least, want to repeat that same mistake. And I'm concerned with everything going on now that we could with Iran. The American people are not looking to get into another protracted war in the Middle East. I think most folks would agree with that. I'm also skeptical that the votes are there for such a war. Skeptical that the votes are there. In February 2020, bipartisan majorities in the House and Senate voted to end hostilities with Iran after the strike on Soleimani. During the congressional debates on the repeal of the 2002 Iraq AUMF, some Republicans attempted to ensure that the law could still be used to strike Iranian-backed proxies. In response, a bipartisan majority in the Senate, including with the crucial support of now Vice President J.D. Vance, voted 60 to 36 to stop those efforts. And so my question is, would you say that we should strengthen the administration's negotiating hand by preemptively authorizing the use of military force against Iran? Do you trust Donald Trump and his administration with that responsibility at this time?
Thank you so much for this question, and I think it's a very important point. So the words I chose were begin the process to conditionally authorize, and I think those two clauses are important in the point I'm making. One is begin the process. That is because I don't think that this decision should be left in the hands of any president without advice and consent and consultation with Congress. And conditionally, because I'm not recommending preemptive authorization, I am recommending that by members of Congress having debate about the conditions and circumstances under which it would approve use of military force, it will send a signal of bipartisan consensus and commitment that that credible military option remains on the table should negotiations fail. And I want to be very clear that my recommendation associated with Mr. Roule is that we should pursue negotiations first, because no military action will eliminate the knowledge and the entire program overnight.
And so I guess what would per your recommendation, what would that trigger be? When do you start down that road?
First, I think the intelligence community should be providing regular updates to members of Congress in a closed and classified atmosphere on exactly what the steps are that the intelligence community understands Iran to be taking. And secondly, I think there should be consultations about exactly what is being contemplated when we talk about military strikes on Iran.
Would you require that we go through a JCPOA type negotiation before going down that road?
I think that testing the diplomatic waters with the regime, either in a multilateral context, in the indirect negotiations that appear to be contemplated at this moment, either way, a negotiated settlement is by far more easier to verify in implementation and blocking Iran's pathways to a nuclear weapon than military force, which on the other side, we don't know what regime decision-making would be, we don't know what Iranian decision-making would be, and we don't know what the war looks like on the other side of that. And this is why I think there's such serious issues that merit congressional input.
Thank you. And also for the other witnesses, just for the record, as we're having this discussion, do you believe that we should do a preemptive AUMF?
I associate myself with Ms. Stroul's comments. We should have a thoughtful process in which Congress plays its rightful role as an institution, but the Iranians must understand that endless negotiations aren't the only strategy of the United States.
Sure. Thank you. Let me check in with you.
Yes, and I agree with Ms. Stroul and Mr. Roule.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Castro. I now recognize for 5 minutes the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Huizenga.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And during the last Congress, I actually led a letter with several of my colleagues on this committee underscoring the urgency of suspending the activity of the Iranian Ghost Armada. And Ms. Jungman, you were been a part of a couple of those conversations, I think. Dispatched from Iran, these vehicles ferry illicit oil and petroleum products to bolster the human rights abuses and terrorist acts perpetrated by the Iranian regime. It's their funding source. These foreign-owned and flagged ships operate undetected within the Ghost Armada and violate maritime law by obfuscating their positioning, thus circumventing U.S. and, frankly, world enforcement. At the time of my letter in 2023, the Armada was made up of 364 vessels, with 47% of them being flagged by the Panama Maritime Authority. It's 171 vessels approximately. As the vessel has now grown, I would argue thanks to a lack of action in the last administration about enforcement. Your sanctions are only as strong as the enforcement that you're willing to put behind it. And by the way, I serve on the Financial Services Committee. I'm the vice chair of that committee. I've been working on this. That is the origin of many of those sanctions, is that committee. The latest report indicates it's now grown to 521 vessels, with 17% of those flagged by Panama, which is about 88. So it's been cut in half on Panama. I'm kind of curious. I'm going to start with you, Ms. Jungman. You've worked on this issue by closely tracking these vessels and engaging in the transportation of illicit Iranian oil. How should the United States deal with countries that continue to flag vessels that are listed on the Department of Treasury's Specially Designated National and Blocked Persons, or SDN, list? And where have those other vessels been flagged?
Thank you for your question, and thank you for your work on this topic. It's a matter of great importance, given that the revenue Iran accumulates from these oil sales is going back to its nuclear program and terrorist activities. If we looked a year ago, like you said, Panama was flagging a significant amount of the ghost fleet, and that number has dropped drastically, which is showing that diplomatic efforts and negotiations with
I would argue exposure, sunlight,
yep.
discussion like this.
Essentially naming and shaming, calling them out for enabling this activity has an impact. And so I think Panama's taken a significant step, but we'd of course like to see that 17% down to 0%.
Where are they getting flagged?
So that's a new problem that's come up. Unfortunately, as a result of Panama deflagging these vessels, we're seeing Iran set up these false registries in Guyana, Comoros, Eswatini even. And
Shall we say maybe less well-known maritime powers?
Sure, yes, but
Because they don't have that kind of, typically that kind of flagging capability or that kind of fleet coming out.
well, I think it's important to note that they're not necessarily legitimate flag registries under these countries. They are companies set up most likely in Dubai or in India that are really run by Iran and providing these registrations to these vessels.
We're going fast on time, but this is important stuff. I need to jump to Arsenio Dominguez from the Republic of Panama. He was elected as the 4-year term as Secretary General of the International Maritime Organization, IMO. They are the UN agency tasked with establishing, quote, the authority for the safety, security, environmental performance of international shipping. How can he possibly effectively lead the IMO while representing a nation that knowingly green lights this kind of transportation of Iranian oil against international sanctions?
That's a great question, and I think the IMO has done little to nothing on this topic, and there should be and could be a lot more from them.
Okay, I've got a lot that I'm going to have to follow up with and some written questions as well, but let's touch on the teapot refineries and deterring those and their willingness to accept Iranian oil. Has there been an impact since President Trump designated one of those teapot refineries last week?
Unfortunately, it's still too soon to see an impact from that, and designating one refinery has little to no impact, as Iran will just move its oil to other refineries. Okay. So there needs to be a more comprehensive approach on targeting and sanctioning them.
And as I've said, look, sanctions are only as good as the weakest link in the sanctions chain, and that's been a huge problem. We need robust multinational buy-in from allies and partners, including Europe. I have recently had a conversation with the ambassador from the EU, who happens to be Lithuanian. She understands this ghost fleet also with Russia and what's been happening there. Do you sense that there's any appetite, any of you in Europe, to push back on Iran's illicit trade with China, whether it be illicit oil or not?
I don't think I can speak for the Europeans, but I think that, we're finally starting to wake up to see that China is the only one benefiting here. China's getting the cheap oil while everybody else is paying real prices. And
because they sell it at a discount. With that, I know I'm over time, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it, and I'll be writing some questions as well to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Huizinga. I now recognize for 5 minutes the gentlewoman and ranking member of the Middle East and North Africa Subcommittee, Ms. Sherfilis McCormick of Florida.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. As we've heard today, the United States, combined with our partners and allies in the region, must take all necessary measures to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons and to halt its support for terrorism. One of the main tools to help curb Iran's development of nuclear weapons and its continued funding of its terrorist proxies is sanctions. That is why I was proud to introduce bipartisan legislation with Congressman Lawler, who's the chairman for the Middle East, to strengthen sanctions on foreign entities enabling Iran's illicit oil trade. Over the past few years, we have witnessed growing alignment between Iran, Russia, and China, presenting a significant challenge to the United States' national security and global stability. Ms. Stroul, what steps did the Biden administration take to combat these alliances?
Thank you for that question. A variety of different elements. The first is to lean into strengthening our unmatched network of allies and partners in order to increase Russia's isolation in the European theater, China's isolation in the Indo-Pacific theater, and Iranian isolation in the Middle East. We worked with all of our longtime allies and partners across those different theaters. Number two was to highlight and expose the ways in which this axis of upheaval is supporting itself counter to the interests of our allies and partners. Iranian drones killing Ukrainians via Russia, Iranian support to Russian defense industry, Russia's provision of more sophisticated defense technology to China, Chinese purchase of Iranian oil at a discount. I could go on and on with these examples. We should also talk about North Korean foot soldiers fighting on behalf of Russia in Ukraine. All of this suggests an emerging axis that is working to challenge the current international global order that benefits and keeps Americans safe. There was also successive rounds of sanctions to break and diminish the different ways in which they're strengthening. And again, provision of security support, assistance, military aid, and intelligence to our allies and partners so that they understand exactly what the negative strategic impact is of this emerging axis to their and our security.
What additional measures would you recommend be implemented to prevent Russia and China from aiding Iran in evading sanctions?
Well, first of all, we need to continue to sanction those activities. And the sanctioning not only cuts off and disincentivizes it from a financial perspective, but it also shines a light on and exposes that nefarious activity. Clearly, though, I would say that it seems the Chinese government doesn't really care if it gets exposed, and neither does President Putin of Russia. So we're going to have to find more ways to disincentivize this behavior, and a lot of that is making sure that Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran feel the consequences of this cooperation, not just from Washington, but from European capitals and Middle East capitals. Red carpet should not be rolled out for the leaders of these countries. Sanctions loopholes in certain economic environments should not be allowed for these illicit networks, and more has to be done to impose consequences and cost.
Well, I want to turn our attention for a moment to Syria. We know that the fall of the Assad regime was a major blow to Iran's influence in Syria. However, what America does next is critical to the future of the country. Ms. Stroul, do you believe America's current policy in Syria is positioned well to further undermine Iran?
Right now, we have a transitional government in Damascus under the leadership of interim President Ahmed al-Shara, and he is saying that he is committed to fighting ISIS in Syria and has told Iran that they will not be allowed to use Syrian territory the way they did under Bashar al-Assad. And he's also looking to impose consequences on Russia and deny it use of that naval base that's on the Mediterranean. All of these are interests that align with U.S. security objectives, as well as having a secure, unified Syria under the control of one government. But right now, U.S. policy is not geared towards seizing these opportunities. We need to find ways to support the Syrian people through some measured sanctions relief, benchmarked against performance of the Shara government.
And before I run out of time, I just wanted to ask you this last question. Do you believe that dismantling the USAID in Syria is helpful or harmful to U.S. interests in Syria?
I believe that it's harmful. I think what Syrian people will remember is an American flag or the USAID stamp on emergency food assistance, stabilization assistance, clean water, baby formula, and the U.S. actually putting skin in the game to demonstrate that we care about the lives and the livelihoods of Syrian people. And by taking this precious element of American power off the table, we undermine our own ability to achieve our interests in Syria.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Jungman, you talk about the sophisticated and deceptive techniques that the Iranian regime is utilizing to evade oil sanctions, including through foreign front companies. Iran also remains heavily dependent on China to sustain its illicit oil trade, which is like 90% of Iran's oil exports go to China, primarily independent teapot refineries. So you note that Chinese purchase of Iranian oil increased by over 20% last year, despite the U.S. sanctions. So in your perspective, how successful has the U.S. been in identifying these teapot refineries and front companies?
Thank you for your question. I think it's important to remember that until end of 2024, we saw an administration that was essentially doing lax sanctions enforcement. As a result of that, Iran was able to build up its revenues and in turn despite these sanctions, is easily able to replace the vessels that are designated. And until there's a comprehensive designation across the entire Ghost fleet, these vessels will continue to export Iranian oil to China. When looking at the refineries themselves, I think that it was a great first step from this administration to designate the refineries we saw sanctioned, I guess, 2 weeks ago. But unfortunately, designation on one refinery has little to no impact. There has to be a comprehensive, holistic approach on all of the refineries that are taking on Iranian oil.
Can you talk about the realistic, short-term action that the U.S. can take to close that loophole? What about the long-term actions, short-term and long-term actions that we can take to close that loophole?
Sure. I think that there needs to be in addition with sanctions, there has to be negotiation or a diplomatic approach. And I think if there's any president that will be able to figure out what to hold over China's head, it'll be this president.
Thank you. Mr. Roule, one of the recommendations you provide in your testimony to counter the Iranian regime's malign activities is to continue investing in the regional military, economic, and commercial partnerships, because in your testimony, in quote, regional economic and social success is as essential to our security interests as their military strength, end quote. So what role do joint security exercises or intelligence sharing activities with our allies play in disrupting Iran's illicit activities?
Thank you, Congresswoman. The relationships we have with our Gulf partners and other regional partners played a profound role in the defense of Israel during Iran's ballistic missile attack on Israel. We saw years of CENTCOM's investment in those relationships come to fruition in the smooth air defense of the entire region, and thousands of lives, hundreds of thousands of lives were saved as a result of that. But this is a broader target set because the Iranians are moving, as I say, in the Red Sea Basin, they're moving in the Persian Gulf area, they're moving in throughout the Arabian Peninsula, and these relationships require a tremendous investment by the CENTCOM team as well as our Department of Defense as a whole.
Thank you. Ms. Jungman, let me come back to you. You talk about the IRGC's efforts to diversify its revenue streams, including through cryptocurrency, and how it offers Iran a way to bypass financial oversight and quietly move funds across the borders. So in your perspective, how extensively is the IRGC using cryptocurrency to evade sanctions?
We saw around, I think it was $8 billion of transactions from Iran using cryptocurrency. And I think that this is an area they're obviously tapping into as sanctions, are coming out. So they're moving their money there because it's harder to track, and I think that it's an area that sanctions could be enforced stronger.
So could you talk about some of the policy changes that you think is necessary to improve that effectiveness of sanctions? And also, what risk do Iran's cryptocurrency and foreign company activities pose to global financial integrity?
I will. This is not my area of expertise, but I'm happy to follow up with a written response there.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I ask that because, I want to see if these tactics could set a precedent for other rogue actors or states. And I think we've been pretty clear on the reason why we need a digital assets framework to coordinate with our allies to address those crypto crime. So thank you so much for your testimony, and I yield back. Let's see, who is next? Representative Stanton, I recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Iran has built a network of proxies across the Middle East, sowing chaos and instability in the region for decades. It has funded, trained, and armed Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, and various militia groups to target Israel and other regional rivals, all while keeping Tehran out of the direct conflict. The human cost of Iran's offensive is undeniable. On October 7, 2023, 1,300 Israelis were murdered by Hamas terrorists, and attacks by these proxy militia have injured or killed American troops. Over the last 18 months, Iran has continued to support its proxies as they send ballistic missiles and drones at Israeli targets and at American service members. But Iran's axis of resistance is waning. Right now, we are at a critical and fragile moment for the region. Iranian proxies are weakened, and new leadership in Lebanon and Syria are refusing to bow to Tehran's influence. The U.S., acting in partnership with our allies, has an opportunity to end Iran's malign influence and to protect our ally Israel and expand the Abraham Accords and change the trajectory of the region for decades to come. But we can only take advantage of this moment if we maintain a focus on democracy building, work with and support our allies in the region, and fully enforce the U.S. sanctions regime. In a completely self-defeating move, the Trump administration has eliminated impactful programs that support the rule of law, protect human rights, and counter misinformation. Limiting U.S. foreign aid and programs is a gift to our adversaries, Iran, but also to China and Russia. International investments are an essential instrument of U.S. foreign policy and U.S. national security policy, and has been for decades under Republican and Democratic administrations. Now, there are still some active aid programs in the region, and we need to make sure those resources get delivered efficiently to the people that need it. Mr. Roule, what can the U.S. do to support foreign aid delivery while also preventing Iranian malign activity?
The best expertise on foreign aid delivery in the region are regional partners themselves. They know the neighborhood, they know the players, they know where corruption exists, they know the needs of their people, and building relationships with these actors themselves will allow us to know how best to deliver and where the impact can be the greatest. And this goes to the previous question by one of your colleagues. If we have relationships with our reliable partners in the region and we extract utility from that in many different areas to include foreign aid, we can build soft power impact as well as our military impact.
To successfully deter Iran and our global adversaries, we should be leveraging our allies and our partners. President Trump's go-it-alone foreign policy strategy is short-sighted and self-defeating. He started trade wars with our neighbors and angering our friends, even causing South Korea and Japan to restart trade discussions with China for the first time in 5 years. And Vice President J.D. Vance, in public speeches and embarrassingly in leaked signal chats, has spit in the eye of our European allies. Europe is the second largest arms supplier to Israel. The UK critically stepped in to shoot down missiles fired at by Iran, at Israel in last October's escalation. And France helped broker the critical Lebanon-Israel ceasefire. They are vital to achieving Middle Eastern peace and supporting democratic goals in the region. In addition to those values, Europe's presence and our presence in the Middle East contribute to stronger global trade and business, another vital component of keeping stability. Also for Ms. Stroul, how has Europe worked to secure the Red Sea global shipping lanes, and how should we work with them to better stop Houthi attacks in the Red Sea?
Thank you for the question. The Europeans have both participated in a U.S.-led defensive coalition called Prosperity Guardian, which has kept the critical choke points in the southern Red Sea open. Some European partners, as well as others in other theaters, also participated with us in multilateral offensive strikes last year to take Houthi capabilities off the table in Yemen. And the Europeans maintain their own separate defensive coalition as well in the Red Sea.
Thank you. The final question is for Ms. Jungman about China, and they're unfortunately working with Iran. What is China's role in helping Iran avoid oil sanctions?
China plays a large role in enabling Iran to accumulate this revenue. They purchased 90% of Iranian oil is going to China. It serves as the lifeline for Iran's revenue and extremist activity.
All right. Thank you very much for those answers, and I will yield back the rest of my time.
Thank you. I recognize Representative Davison of Ohio for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Thanks to our colleagues for hosting this hearing. Thanks to our witnesses. Appreciate your testimony today. First, Iran and their despotic regime have just horrible human rights abuses. They've been a force really for terror and instability in the Middle East for a long time. The 10/7 attacks by Hamas were a profoundly evil act by a network of terror groups all linked to Iran. Maximum pressure against these groups and their Iranian sponsors is more than warranted, and I applaud the Trump administration for doing just that. The second truth about the situation that we're in is that a full-blown ground war in Iran is simply not in America. It's not our war to fight. As we turn towards strategic competition with China, we cannot afford to continue to be bogged down in the Middle East. For the United States, an economy of force strategy in the Middle East makes sense so that we can address American interests while minimizing the American investment there. This allows us to focus on other strategic threats and more immediate security risks to our own country. As our committee's State Department authorization process moves forward, I look forward to engaging on pressing issues for the Arms Export Control Act and AUMF reform so that Congress is active in confronting the rapidly evolving security environment in the world. Mr. Roule, thank you for your testimony today, and I personally worry about an overly broad reading of the 2001 AUMF providing a blank check for virtually any war in the Middle East without Congress really having sometimes even knowledge, but certainly input in it. Failure to update the 2001 AUMF represents an abdication of congressional war powers. So as we confront really needed security challenges with Houthi proxies, for example, who are disrupting sea traffic and posing a threat not just in the oceans to our Navy and others, what's the actual underlying authorization today?
Congressman, it's a complicated question, and I'm going to evade some of that because I'm not an expert. But I will say this: Congress needs to start now, as Ms. Stroul stated, with a process to understand what role should be played to develop specific authorities, because the Quds Force needs to be taken apart in the region, because a nuclear deal that simply provides funding for the Quds Force to reestablish its proxy network to the region just repeats this entire system of violence, and we face the same situation over and over again. So we really do need to understand the prospect of military action against Iran and its personnel and its architecture at present, and Congress needs to play its role in that.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's exactly what I've tried to do for a long time since I've been here, really since the summer of 2016. Updating the 2001 AUMF's been darn near impossible. Frankly, for people like me that wanted to do it, we were blocked from even being on this committee. Blocked from anybody that really wanted reform couldn't get on the committee of jurisdiction. And then when you try to do it through appropriations, like, oh, you're supposed to do it through the committee of jurisdiction. And now, even after the Afghan war has wound down, long after we've formally left Iraq, we still keep the 2001 AUMF. Does anyone believe that the Houthis or Hamas, let's just say Hamas, are they affiliates of al-Qaeda? I mean, that's the underlying situation. They're terrorists in that sense, but they're not coordinating. They share some similar enemies, but they're not really covered by the 2001 AUMF. So I think it is urgent that we update them. And, I definitely appreciate y'all's effort to call that out. But Ms. Jungman, in your testimony, you bemoan the existence of cryptocurrency to some extent, saying that the pseudonymous nature of blockchain transactions makes enforcement challenging. However, you admit that it only makes up about $8 billion in transaction. In reality, I'm the chairman of National Security and Illicit Finance. We just had a hearing earlier today where people trying to trace the money actually like cryptocurrency because it's on a public blockchain. So it's easier to follow the money. It still presents challenges for on and off ramps, but when it's on a blockchain, it's easier to detect. So, what proportion of Iran's illicit finance is really crypto versus conventional finance?
In the grand scheme, the $8 billion is not that significant when you look at, $50 billion that was made in oil revenues last year, or $135 billion in oil revenue that was made between 2021 and 2024. So I think that there needs to be stricter enforcement and oversight on the blockchain and the crypto transactions, but it doesn't necessarily need to be.
Yeah, thank you for that. My time's expired, and I yield.
Thank you. I now recognize Representative Moskowitz from Florida for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I want to thank Chairman Lawler and Chairman Mast for bringing this hearing. You know, I have supported for months now giving the Iranians a period of time to end their nuclear program peacefully, or that the United States should end it for them. I've worked with Chairman Lawler on that in the last Congress, dealing with Iranian oil. And in this Congress, Senator Lindsey Graham and I filed a resolution to get a sense of Congress on just that issue. Iran is weaker now than they've been in a very long time, weaker in the region because of Israel's efforts against Hamas and Hezbollah, this administration's intervention on the Houthis. Now is the time. There's no question now is the time to try to bring this to a peaceful solution, right? And that's really up to the Iranians to choose what path they want to go. But I also have to recognize that we're in the 3rd month of the administration. And for 3 months now, the administration has treated Canada and Greenland and Europe and Ukraine and PBS and NPR and the Associated Press worse than they've talked and treated Iran. I mean, 3 months in, they've just noticed all of a sudden that perhaps we should turn our attention to Iran instead of these distractions of, oh, we're going to get Gaza, or Canada is going to be the 51st state, or, oh, Greenland. I mean, this is the opportunity, and it's an opportunity, quite frankly, for the administration that's been very partisan over the last 3 months to do something on a bipartisan basis. But I'm also deeply worried about the vice president. If we look at the text messages on Signal for Signalgate, the vice president seems to be against striking the Houthis. Well, if he's against striking the Houthis, then, I mean, where is he going to be on striking Iran if they don't choose a peaceful solution? Now, obviously, he's the vice president. The president makes the final decision. But if you look at that conversation, a deputy chief of staff had to weigh in from the White House, putting the vice president in his place, saying the president was clear on his direction. And so, let me ask a question. Based on what you've seen, we've all seen publicly in that Signal chat, this isolationist trend that's going on in some, circles of the Republican Party, Ms. Jungman, are you concerned that we may miss an opportunity to really curtail Iran's nuclear program? Because, again, if you look at what the vice president was saying with the Houthis, right, he clearly did not want to do the strike that the president had ordered.
Thank you for that question. I think it is important to look at the efforts that the administration has done over the last 3 months, which includes designations on Iran, its Ghost Fleet, and a refinery in China.
But those are meaningless. The Biden administration, and I was critical of the Biden administration of these designations and non-enforcement of certain things. I mean, I was very critical when the Biden administration did not enforce the bill that Mike Lawler and I passed dealing with Iranian oil. And so, we can sign executive orders for maximum pressure, but really, this president is not shy. Right? He's not shy. He tells us how he feels at all times. Okay? And so, it just last week, all of a sudden we turned our attention to Iran, which I'm happy about. Better late than never. But there's something going on in this administration that you should all wake up to, that there is a wing led by the vice president that didn't want to strike the Houthis and probably doesn't want to curtail Iran's nuclear program. How are you going to deal with that?
I don't see that from Treasury right now. I do think that there are efforts being made, and I think, looking at the questions we've received, there's bipartisan consensus to go after Iran, and the vice president alone
look,
doesn't.
we have to be clear, right? Because Democrats have made this mistake. When you draw a red line and then you don't do it, we see problems. That's what happened in Syria under the Obama administration. So President Trump has drawn a red line. He has said either we're going to end it peacefully, which I hope we do. We all want that, or the United States is going to end it. That's been said now, and that's what we have to hold the president to. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Representative Issa of California for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm going to pick up where my colleague just left off. Better late than never. Has it been 75 days or is it 72? I wouldn't call this late, in all due respect. But let's contrast it with the previous 4 years. What was the economic position of Iran on the day that President Trump left office?
They were a lot weaker than they are today.
Were they shipping a couple 100,000 barrels a day, not 1.5 million barrels a day?
That's correct.
So during the 4 years of the Biden administration, perhaps in plain sight while other things were being discussed, JCPOA, Iran's nuclear, and so on, they went up by more than 1 million barrels a day times $75, right? And most of it was sold to China, correct? So the last administration allowed China to enrich Iran. During those 4 years, is it accurate to say that that money, a great deal of it ended up in the hands of Hamas, the Houthis, and Hezbollah?
That's correct.
Okay. So I want to go to the go forward. And I know my colleague has left, but 72 days is the beginning of an administration. Over the next 3 years, if maximum pressure includes taking ghost ships off the high seas, do you believe it's possible to reverse that 1 million or 1.2 million of additional oil and bring Iran economically back to where they were 4 years ago?
I do, but I don't think taking the Ghost Fleet off alone will do that.
I'm saying, I'm including that because most of that 1 million barrels plus is shipped through ghost ships, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so as part of a maximum effort, recognizing that Israel may strike in its own best interest between now and the end of October when nuclear legitimacy, according to the last administration, goes forward. As part of a package, economic sanctions, as we know, are not working because people are cheating on them. The number one cheater is China. As the president uses his pressure with China and tariffs, should he include reducing the purchases of clandestine oil from China and Russia as part of a deal with China? Would that be helpful? Additionally, the same thing goes for our European allies who either directly or indirectly buy that sanctioned oil.
Absolutely. I think that's a great place to start and hopefully would have an impact.
Now, just before I spoke, we heard about the so-called reluctance of the vice president to strike the Houthis. In fact, isn't that one of the more major proactive strikes that's occurred in the last several years?
Correct.
And that particular strike, as I understand it, was an offensive strike to take out capability, not simply a retaliatory for a place from which they were fired.
I'm going to defer to Mr. Roule on that, but he's got more expertise in that area.
They are the most significant strikes we've conducted against the Houthis. They're not only taking out, degrading the Houthi weapons capability, but they're taking out Houthi leadership, and they're starting to impact on the Houthi leadership decision-making structure itself.
So Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, the three most powerful arms of Iran, in addition to the oil that gives them money. If those activities continue at the pace they've been going over the last, some of it more than 75 days because of Israel's efforts with Hamas and Hezbollah, but if those three tentacles of Iran are taken out over the next 3 years, if the clandestine oil is reduced to, let's just say, about where it was 4 years earlier, do you believe we can avoid all-out war with Iran, but bring Iran back to a situation in which they must deal or be unable to function because of economic disaster?
If we can also ensure that the Quds Force does not have a logistics line into the region, we can avoid a war based on activities such as Hamas and Houthi actions in the Red Sea. There will be some who will say that Iran could be encouraged to build a nuclear weapon if it thinks it can get away with it and we won't attack. So the president would also have to say, if we see you building a nuclear weapon, we're going to have to use
And I'll just close with one statement. Many people have talked about the nuclear capability, but is it fair to say that the ability to build a nuke only allows you to blow yourself up if you don't have the ability to launch it? And that isn't that part of the administration's responsibility, along with allies, is to make sure that they do not have the ability to launch a nuclear
The
weapon?
gentleman's time's up, and the witnesses may respond in writing if you would choose to do so. Is that okay?
Thank you.
Yes. Let me now recognize Mr. Olszewski of Maryland for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for your time and your testimony today. I'll just open by saying how much I firmly believe with a lot of what was said, and how important it is for the U.S. to use all of the tools at our disposal to dismantle Iran's support for regional terrorism and its nuclear ambition. So thank you for your comments on that. We know that a strong Iranian sanctions regime, which I support and this administration has imposed, is critical to limit the revenue that Iran uses to fund its military and terror proxies in the region. However, we cannot forget about the other national security tools at our disposal, including both diplomacy and development, and that the U.S. has to comprehensively counter the regime's malign activities and hold them accountable for human rights violations. The use of force should be an option, but it should also be our last resort option. Again, we need a comprehensive toolbox to prevent Iran from becoming nuclear equipped and to address the root causes of these abuses. I support a zero-tolerance approach for attacks by Iran's proxies on the United States and our interests. But again, I also believe that any U.S. action must also be taken in accordance with the law and in ways that protects classified information and civilians overseas. It's also worth noting and reiterating that this administration's gutting of foreign assistance programs will only weaken that response. There was a program implemented by a nonprofit back in my home state of Maryland that supported religious and minorities in northern Iraq, in part not to join Iran-backed militias. This project supported thousands of young Yazidis and Christians in a youth employment project to provide financial incentives not to join these armed groups. In its absence, we risk migration and radicalization, including to these Iran-backed proxy groups. We know this program, unfortunately, is not a one-off. Programs to strengthen local capacity and support ethnic and religious minorities in Yemen, Gaza, and Lebanon, where Iran-backed militias continue to hold military and political influence, were cut. Iranian media even praised the pause because it would halt U.S. support for pro-democracy activists in the country. Other media compared it to a cold shower for the regime's opponents and joked that the U.S. was abandoning its allies like disposable tissues, quote, unquote. Ms. Stroul, can you talk about how these soft power programs, like those administered by USAID and the State Department, play an important role in America's response to Iran's activities around the world? How will Iran and their proxies be emboldened by these cuts?
Thank you so much for this question. When we think about all of the different areas where Iran's threat network has been degraded, Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, to some extent Iraq, right now Yemen, what we need to think about is the other side of combat operations. And that's not just humanitarian aid, it's stabilization, reconstruction. Societies and communities need to have something on the other side in order to build up their resilience to resist what the Iranians are going to do, which is try to rebuild their illicit networks for arming, funding, training both fighters and then weapon shipments, drug shipments, et cetera. So we have to give those communities resources to build up their resilience, and we have to give the emerging leaders of these nascent governments the opportunity to deliver for their people, and there I'm specifically talking about Lebanon and Syria. So the pause and dismantling of USAID is not just about the humanitarian aid being taken off the table, it's the non-humanitarian aid, the stabilization assistance, and then it's the decades of U.S. investment in developing our technical expertise, our national security practitioners, our development and technical assistance providers who understand that reconstruction and stabilization on the other side of conflict is inherently a political task, not a military task.
Thank you so much for that response. And I'll just close without an additional question, recognizing that my time is winding down. But just reiterating what my colleague, Representative Keating, honed in earlier, and just advancing my concern, Madam Chair, about the reckless use of platforms that are not secure and in the sharing of very sensitive data. It is not a way to conduct military operations, nor diplomatic operations, nor to impose sanctions. And so I'm deeply concerned about the actions of some of our most highest ranking officials and the fact there's been no accountability. And with that, I'll yield back. Yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me now recognize Mr. Baird from Indiana for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank our witnesses for being here today. The expertise you share with us is very beneficial and very helpful. But I'm going to touch on a couple of three other areas that are of interest to me. The first one being, what role do you think that the Western technology is playing in sustaining Iran, and by extension, Russia's ability to produce lethal weapons like the Shahed 136 drone?
We have seen Iran use dual-use technology that is obtained from Europe, even the United States, through sanctions-busting architecture to import this within its drone system and to even use this within drones that it has sent to Russia for use against Ukraine. This is something that the U.S. law enforcement has worked against successfully in some cases for years. Iran has a robust sanctions-busting program in this regard, and Iran will continue to use this system to acquire technology that it can't produce at home.
Ms. Jungman?
I'm going to tackle this from a little bit of a different angle, and I think it's an area that hasn't had a lot of attention. But we've talked a lot today about the Dark Fleet and the Ghost Fleet. There's Western technology that's used on these vessels. Every ship essentially has some Western component on it. That's an area that could be looked at closer.
I would associate myself specifically with Mr. Roule. The threat is the dual-use technology. So part of this is about sanctions and shining a light and exposure. It's also about education initiatives with the commercial sector so they understand the risk of both the legitimate uses of some of this technology and then the illegitimate and illicit ways in which a regime like Iran might use it.
The next part of that is what steps can be taken to prevent Iran from procuring that critical technology. And Ms. Jungman, you kind of started on that conversation, so please start.
Sure. I think, as I've previously mentioned, there's still a number of Western entities that are involved in the maritime industry and these vessels, such as the classification societies, the flag states, and the insurance companies. It's not enough to just designate the vessels themselves. The vessel will move to a new owner, a new company, and so on. So there needs to be a more comprehensive approach to targeting these vessels and their associated networks.
Mr. Roule.
We need to ensure that law enforcement partners in Europe and Asia are working closely with the United States and our Gulf partners to identify import actors in Iran who are attempting to bring in dual-use technology for Iran's military and security services.
Thank you. Ms. Stroul?
I have nothing to add. I think my colleagues did a great job answering the question.
It's a good answer. One other area. Do you believe that the United States and its allies are focused enough on preventing the rebuilding of the Iranian proxy groups? And what more could we do if that's true? Mr. Roule.
If there is a nuclear deal that provides Iran with sanctions relief that allows the Quds Force to rebuild Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis over time, we recreate the very world we have worked so hard to dismantle today. It is critical that any new nuclear deal simply does not allow the Quds Force to do this. And this therefore becomes a problem set. Do we come up with an approach that as the international community compel Iran to, in essence, change the nature of the Quds Force, to turn it into a counterterrorism element, which is something every country should have, and not an element that has the job of creating militias and terrorists. Until Iran does this, it is a terrorist nation.
Thank you. And I see I only got 26 seconds left, and so I'm sorry to the other two, but I yield back.
Thank you. Let me now recognize Representative Schneider of Illinois for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, I want to thank the witnesses for joining us here. So I keep this next to my desk. It is the JCPOA from 10 years ago. It's tabbed and marked and highlighted. 10 years ago, I studied it closely because so much was at stake. Iran was on the precipice of a nuclear weapon, and the world came together. And at that time, as we all recall, it was the E3 plus 3. It was a P5 plus 1, whatever you called it, but it was United States, our European allies, UK, France and Germany, and China and Russia. As you discussed earlier, what was available to us then is not available to us now. And I had issues with the JCPOA a decade ago because while it may have temporarily blocked Iran's pathways to a nuclear weapon, it didn't permanently close them. It left it to where we are today. And we meet today at, I really believe, is a crossroad, as you've touched on. Over the past year, we've seen Iran's strategic position almost turn 180 degrees. Its proxies are diminished, its air defenses are weakened. At the same time, again, as was mentioned, Iran's breakout time is almost to the goal line. It's measured in weeks, maybe even days. And we all know a nuclear-armed Iran would transform the strategic map of the Middle East once again. It would not only endanger our allies, including Israel, it would trigger in all likelihood a regional arms race. It would embolden the terrorist proxies, and it would undercut the global non-proliferation regime. Now, we know this moment didn't come out of nowhere. Iran's been working on a nuclear weapon for more than a generation. We can talk about the decision to invade Iraq and then empower Iran. We can talk about the JCPOA, which was a problem. I think at the end of the day, the decision to pull out of the JCPOA without a strategy of how to move forward and make sure that Iran couldn't get closer to a weapon left us at the point we are in today. Iran literally at the goal line. And that is the challenge we have. Now, part of the problem, I think, in pulling out of the JCPOA was that there wasn't a plan, that it was more about the headlines than about making actual progress. It was not very serious. This has been a challenge that I've seen with the administration, first term of the Trump administration, and today with the return of the administration, but perhaps even greater. The dismantling of USAID, the freezing of aid to camps like Al-Hol, where ISIS remnants remain active, the whiplash of threats followed by back-channel talks with Hamas. All of it suggests a governing style that is far more impulsive, theatrical, and dangerously untethered from strategy. I wish we could trust that this renewed maximum pressure approach being discussed was grounded in facts, deliberation, and interagency coordination. I believe that President Trump had read the briefings, sought out dissenting views, or agonized over the details of a strike plan. But I don't have that confidence, and I'm very concerned about where we are right now. Serious policy means aligning sanctions, intelligence, and diplomacy. It means working with allies to close loopholes, not just naming problems, but resourcing, developing solutions. It means being honest about what airstrikes can and cannot accomplish, and about what it takes to truly dismantle Iran's nuclear weapons program. We know this challenge won't get easier with time, as has been discussed earlier. Iran's nuclear program isn't just a bargaining chip, it's a shield from behind which Tehran wages war through proxies in Gaza, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. And that's why I was proud last Congress to join with then Chairman McCall to introduce HRS 559, declaring it the policy of the United States that a nuclear Islamic Republic of Iran is not acceptable under any circumstances. So with that, let me turn to you, Ms. Stroul. You've spoken previously about the need for a regional architecture. Can you speak how seriously you think our Gulf partners view the risk of a nuclear Iran, and whether they believe the U.S. is still, or U.S. does have at all, a coherent plan to stop it?
I think, thank you so much for that question, Congressman. Many of our Gulf partners are hedging because they are uncertain as to what U.S. commitments are and whether or not U.S. commitments to the region and to their defense will be enduring. So almost every U.S. partner in the Gulf has pursued their own rapprochement with the Iranian regime, exchanging ambassadors, maintaining economic relations, as well as very consistent diplomatic engagement back and forth. We are using some of these channels for the passing of messages, but the bottom line is, if there is going to be military strikes used against Iran, we're going to need the support of our partners in the Gulf. We're going to need flexibility with the bases we have where U.S. forces are present, and if we are going to achieve a negotiated settlement, Iran is going to need to hear from our partners in the Middle East that they are as serious about getting to a negotiated settlement that blocks all Iranian pathways to a nuclear weapon as Washington is. And those are some of the, I think, security commitments both to their self-defense and to our long-term commitment in developing this regional architecture that could benefit from clarification at this moment in time.
Thank you. I've gone over
Thank you,
time.
Ms.
I
Stroul.
appreciate the extension. I yield back.
Now recognize Mr. Kane, Representative Kane from New Jersey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Roule, what type of support is Russia providing to Iran's nuclear program, and what role is Russian state-owned energy giant Rosatom playing in supporting Iran's nuclear ambitions?
Russia's role in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action was limited to support for the Bushehr civilian nuclear power plant on Iran's southwest coast. The development of that plant, there were discussions on the perhaps building of other nuclear power plants in the country. And part of the deal under JCPOA was that, in essence, Iran would send spent nuclear fuel to Russia in exchange for fresh nuclear fuel. Now, that, of course, stopped when Iran ceased to do this. I think the most important question is Russia providing Iran with capabilities to allow it to move closer to a nuclear weapon? Now, there is no public information of which I am aware that is occurring. It is also a fact, however, that Russia does have a presence in country through Bushehr, and that were we to have a multilateral negotiation with Iran on its nuclear program, Russia would be a prominent part because of that element. China as well, because of China's role with the Iraq power plant, its former plutonium plant, which is due to come online in 2026.
And what types of support is Russia currently providing Iran's proxies? And what does Russia hope to gain from its outreach to the Houthis? And what might trigger the Kremlin to step this support up or decrease it?
There have been reports that Russia has attempted to provide weapons to the Houthis, and that diplomatic pressure from regional actors have prevented this, and Russia may have told these actors that the purpose of this support was to complicate the lives of Western powers who were supporting Ukraine. There has also been some reporting of Russian weaponry that has found its way to Hezbollah, although the evidence of Russia's direct engagement with Hezbollah is more tenuous. And Russia has, of course, provided intelligence engagement with its counterparts in Iran on how to defeat Western intelligence.
So, in your view, what, therefore, does the Iranian regime hope to gain from its increasingly cozy relationship with the Kremlin, and what threat does that pose to U.S. national security priorities?
Although Russia is a sometimes competitor with Iran, it is a malign actor. Its support with it has blocked all pressure on Iran at the United Nations. So, for example, regarding Yemen, Russia has made sure that there has been no significant investigation of Iran's support for the Houthis at the United Nations for many years. So Russia's support for Iran is significant, it is malign, it is pervasive, and it impacts the global economy.
Are there points of friction within that parallel relationship that the U.S. could effectively exploit?
I'm not aware of many, but Dana, do you have anything you'd like to add on that?
I think the bottom line here is that Russia and Iran share the objective of challenging the United States, our influence, and our investment in the current global and international order. And that strategic convergence is stronger than any wedge we might want to drive between the two.
Thank you all for your testimony here today, and I'll yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Representative Amo from Rhode Island for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to our witnesses for being here. I know it's been a little while that you've been sitting there. And Ms. Stroul, good to see you again. The last time we were here was last April. And I discussed with you the growing cooperation between Ayatollah Khamenei and Vladimir Putin. And back then, we saw Iran transfer drones to Russia. The same Iranian drones which were turned on Israel were used by Putin to attack Ukraine. 1 year later, Putin's drones are still taking the lives of innocent civilians. And the ties between Russia and Iran have grown stronger. Earlier this year, Russia and Iran signed a 20-year strategic partnership treaty with a military cooperation agreement. And the duo has expanded to include a third, Xi Jinping's China. In March, warships from all three countries conducted joint naval exercises in the Gulf of Oman, the strategic corridor for more than 1/4 of the world's seaborne oil. That same week, China hosted Russia and Iranian diplomats to discuss Iran's nuclear program. So in the aftermath of Trump 1.0 and the withdrawal of commitments to contain Iran by leaving the JCPOA, Iran is continued in its acceleration of its development of its nuclear program. Now, as we are in Trump 2.0, as President Trump continues our surrender on the global stage, as we've seen in the last 70+ days, China is racing to fill that vacuum. Xi is strengthening Iran's hands thanks to Trump's retreat. The annual threat assessment of the U.S. intelligence community released last month found that China, Russia, and Iran were three of the largest foreign threats to the United States. Ms. Stroul, what actions should President Trump continue from the Biden administration to deter this growing alliance and ensure that Russia and China do not continue to help Iran evade sanctions?
Thank you so much for that question, Congressman. Good to see you as well. What we've seen since last year is continued coordination and strategic convergence across Russia, Iran, China, and sometimes North Korea. So it's diplomatic protection of Iran at the UN Security Council and across many international institutions. It's not just exchanging lessons learned on how to evade sanctions, it's also deeper economic cooperation, working on how to de-dollarize their economies, how to increase banking transactions between these different capitals to make themselves less exposed to U.S. sanctions. It's increasing exchanges in sophisticated defense technology. It's the military exercises, as you note. And then it's even trading and exchanging lessons learned on how to exert domestic control inside their countries, suppress human rights and popular protests, not to mention nuclear cooperation. So all of this requires a whole of government approach from the administration. It is investing in our unmatched network of allies and partners in order to counter this axis. It is restoring the elements of U.S. soft power, USAID, investing in our diplomats in order to counter the diplomatic actions of these different malign actors. It is strengthening our foreign military sales processes, our own military exercises, our own defense and security cooperation in order to counter that, and also making sure that we continue to have the most professional U.S. military in the world, because partners and allies should want to do military exercises with us, not with Russia or China.
And Ms. Stroul, with my remaining time, what can we do or what changes can we make to disrupt the growing ties between, a lot of those points that you just referenced was how we engage with our partners and our allies, but what can we do to disrupt the close ties between Iran, Russia, and China as this connection grows even stronger in their opposition to us?
We're going to have to disincentivize the interest of those leaders and in those capitals to deepen their coordination with each other, to make it less attractive to do that, and for them to perceive that the consequences of that deeper coordination that runs counter to U.S. interests will be more painful than pursuing this course. And again, it means demonstrated resolve to maintain U.S. military partnerships, to invest and provide security assurances and support for the defense of our allies and partners so that they're working with us and not hedging towards this other access. And it is fielding a strong diplomatic corps and a strong network of development professionals.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. At this time, I recognize myself. I'm unfortunate that my colleague left with his JCPOA binder, as that would have been very helpful. We've got a small chair in the back that's a little bit wobbly, and that's about the only thing you could have put under it to actually stabilize it, since it did nothing to stabilize Iran. Ms. Stroul, you really loved the quick fire, rapid fire stuff when it came to the Biden administration. I kind of want to follow suit here, if you will, and I want to make this quick. Did oil exportation increase under the Biden administration?
Sanctions enforcement is an area that could have been improved.
Did it increase under the Biden administration?
Chinese
Yes or no?
purchases of discounted Iranian oil increased under the previous
Okay.
administration.
Did Biden delist the Houthi rebels?
Yes.
Did that disrupt 12% of global trade through the Red Sea?
The delisting itself was not the cause of the disruption of the
Did
global
the
trade.
increase in actual attacks as a result of delisting the Houthis increase the amount of disruption of global trade through the Red Sea, resulting in 12% of global trade being disrupted?
Iranian provision of support to the Houthis is part of the
Did
reason
the unfreezing of assets and the increase of oil trade give more money to Iran to be able to fund proxy militias?
I can't speak to the exact fungibility of the fund.
I actually thought that was your job. Did the currency of the Rial, go up in value versus the dollar during the time the Biden administration was in place?
My colleague would be better positioned on that.
I'll allow you to answer.
Yes.
Yes, it did, because under max pressure, it's at about $1 million Rial to the dollar, something they haven't seen in a long time. So I noticed that you had a lot of really quick, rapid-fire things on the previous administration, but not a whole lot when it came to the increase in maximum pressure that's actually resulted in the Iranian regime reducing the amount of attacks that they have right now. Wasn't it the Biden administration who actually requested the IDF and Israel to launch themselves into a ceasefire for negotiations?
I can't speak to the specifics of that. What
Well,
I know,
the answer is yes. And had they done that, we wouldn't have eliminated Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah. We would not have eliminated Sinwar. We would not have eliminated many of the actual terrorist organization leads that has basically been put in place and enforced to grow stronger as a result of the weakness that the administration had shown. Look what we have today. We talk all the time about how we're so weak on Russia, but was it not the Trump administration who actually removed us from the failed INF treaty? Something that no other administration was willing to do before? Was it not the JCPOA that both General Secretary Ban Ki-moon and Gutierrez said had been violated when Iran was still shipping mid-range ballistic missiles to the Houthis when they were launching against Saudi Aramco? This is preposterous to even assume that the Biden administration had done anything to prevent the enrichment of nuclear, or that the JCPOA or Jake Sullivan or any of the others had done anything that would have weakened the regime. And I want to be very clear. There is a difference, and I think it's important to always point out the differentiation in this. There is a difference in the regime and the Iranian people. The Iranian people want a free Iran. I can tell you that those who are bravely protesting in the streets, those who are continuing to try and risk their lives every single day, like Mahsa Amini did, to say enough is enough, shouldn't be lumped in. So when our colleagues very recklessly just says Iran, I think that that's a very big misnomenclature, and I want to correct that for the record. I want to go into sanction enforcement. Do you feel, Ms. Jungman, that sanctions were enforced under the Biden administration?
Not until late 2024.
And do you feel that Iran is at a stronger or weaker position right now than they were previously?
As a result of the sanctions that have been rolled out over the last few months and at the end of 2024, they are weaker, but not as weak as they could have been if sanctions were fully enforced under the Biden administration.
Completely agreed. And what I noticed from Iran is that not only are they concerned about this administration more so than the last, they've actually moved and relocated their surface-to-air missiles around Qom, around Natanz, around Esfahan, because they know that unlike the Obama-Biden drawn red line, that this administration has actually proven to take real enforcement. Do you think, Mr. Norman, that if we actually, not actually hurting or impacting or having a lot of collateral damage as you would if you hit cities like Tehran or others, but went after the nuclear facilities, that would send a direct message to the regime that we will not continue to play weak with them?
It certainly would send a powerful message to the regime that we would not play weak with them, sir.
And I think that that's really what this administration has proven, both in the first administration and now, is that we're not going to continue to play weak with our adversaries. The China, Russia, Iran, North Korea geopolitical alignment has grown stronger under the previous regime, and it's President Trump and this administration who's continued to try and make the necessary steps to enforce sanctions, to guarantee that we relist the Houthis, to stop the Sea of Navigation from being disrupted, and to actually, for once and for all, actually see that the Iranian people have support from the United States to overthrow a regime who's been dictatorship, tyrannical, and continue to do this, but only build and bolden themselves under the Biden administration. With that, I will now recognize, if it pops up here, and I'm not sure that they're updating it. There we go. We will recognize the gentle lady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean.
There we go. I'm going to slide down one. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bear with me, and let's restart the clock, please.
Restarted the clock.
Thank you very much. I thank Chairman Mast and Ranking Member Meeks for holding this hearing, and I thank all of you. Your expertise, your passion, and your intellect around these issues is very valuable to us in these incredibly challenging times. Going back to the JCPOA, in 2015, the P5+1, the EU and Iran agreed to the JCPOA, choosing diplomacy over aggression to ensure that Iran's nuclear program would be peaceful, constrained. The JCPOA was a historic deal in ensuring verification and compliance, and the IAEA had previously warned that its failure would be a loss for nuclear verification and multilateralism. Unfortunately, in 2018, even though the IAEA verified that Iran was implementing its nuclear-related commitments, President Trump, in my mind, recklessly withdrew the United States from the JCPOA and without a plan, as my colleague, Mr. Schneider, spoke about. Mr. Roule, I'd like to go back to the very beginning of your testimony. It is stunning testimony that I think bears repeating. You said in page 1 and page 2, first, the IAEA notes that Iran continues to expand its production of 60% enriched uranium. Is that correct?
That is correct, ma'am.
You say Iran appears capable of producing its first quantity of 90% enriched uranium. Can you speak to that? What leads us to know that?
That is based on the International Atomic Energy Agency's access to Iran's nuclear program at present, which is limited, but it still takes place.
And when you use the expression, as experts do, they would have the possibility of 90% enriched uranium sufficient for one nuclear weapon in about a week. What does that about a week mean to the layman like me?
Well, it means that they have centrifuges which spin gas and basically produce highly enriched uranium that would then have to be shaped into a warhead that could then be used as a weapon. This is the first stage of that. So this is before the warhead construction starts. So they don't have a weapon, they just have the material that would begin the process towards a weapon. So they don't have a bomb, but they have the fissile material that would then begin the process for a weapon.
What stages were they at prior to President Trump removing the United States from JCPOA? What were the numbers then?
They had a very, very tiny amount of enriched uranium at a level that was much, much reduced to this. It was about below 5%. They had a very small number of centrifuges. But I should also say, ma'am, that when President Trump left JCPOA, they did not significantly increase their centrifuge production until, frankly, diplomatic talks began under the Biden administration. And it wasn't because of the Biden administration itself. It was just because the Iranians just decided to expand their program, even when diplomacy was offered.
And then you said, let me see here. Second, you said Iran continues to increase the number and sophistication of its centrifuge cascades. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, in essence, the centrifuges have, the more advanced the centrifuge is, the greater its efficiency, the faster it can produce highly enriched uranium. And what that means is the faster it can produce the fissile material for a weapon. And the faster it can produce something means the fewer number of centrifuges, which means the footprint is smaller. It means the smaller the installation can be, meaning the easier you can hide it. So in essence, Iran's nuclear architecture right now appears to be designed to produce the highest enriched uranium in the fastest way possible, and not the lowest enriched uranium in just an average speed possible. So it's not producing enriched uranium in a way that you would expect for a civilian nuclear program. It is also producing this enriched uranium in centrifuge cascades in facilities that are deeply buried, that look as if they're designed to survive a military attack. That is all very suspicious.
Very suspicious. I see my time is up. Where does this leave our partners, our former partners in the JCPOA, if you could answer that?
Well, the Europeans have been attempting to revive negotiations for some time without success, in part because the Iranians themselves refuse to cooperate with negotiations, as they refuse to cooperate under the Biden administration, which is why then the Secretary of State in the Biden administration called the negotiations to an end.
I thank you very much, all of you. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get to everybody. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. At this time, we recognize our good friend from Texas, Mr. Sell, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2015, President Obama flew a plane with $400 million in cash to the Ayatollah and released billions more. In 2021, President Biden rescinded President Trump's maximum pressure campaign, as we've heard. They went from like $4 billion, I think, in reserves to somewhere around $100 billion today, perhaps more. We have suffered through multiple inept leadership in terms of Iran. And now we have a strong commander-in-chief who sees maximum pressure working. However, as a Article I branch of government, Congress must have jurisdiction over sanctions. Some say so over the sanctions for Iran and for any future administration. That's why I have reintroduced the Iran Sanctions Relief Review Act, which passed the House last session. But my bill will give us a seat at the table and the American people a voice and a view. We must strengthen Congress's hand to protect future generations from emergency existential threats to our nation's survival, and the Iranian nuclear weapon might do that. We have a duty to do that. So I want to start with you, Mr. Roule. What is the center of gravity of the Iranian nuclear program? Is it the warhead? Is it the guidance system? Is it the missile itself? Is it the facilities? Is it the potential for software from your years in the CIA, what is the center of gravity?
It's a broad federated program that exists in many locations across the broad geography. For many years, the center would have been the development of fissile material, but as we've just discussed, that is produced at a number of locations at a very advanced rate at present. So understanding their number of centrifuges, their production rate of highly enriched uranium is the most important aspect of the program at present.
So you think they can quickly link the material with a guidance system with a missile, because they've never tested this either.
No, sir, I didn't say that. In fact, it's unlikely they would be able to do so quickly or efficiently, in my view. They have not done that, and the time it would take for them to do that depends upon amount of testing, how quickly and securely they'd wish to do that, and the metallurgy to shape a warhead. And by the way, that's also saying they decide they wouldn't put it into a gravity bomb, into an airplane, or some other system to deliver it.
Or sneak it into a port somewhere.
Or sneak it into a port, sir. So, but at this point, it's the creation of fissile material in the enrichment program.
Interesting. I would have said it would have been the building of an actual warhead on a missile. But anyway, Ms. Jungman, we know that the Ayatollah stopped the program supposedly in early 2000s. He's now, what, 86, 87 years old? Do you think that they may be doing something behind his back, seeing that his days are numbered? What are the chances that is happening, that somebody surreptitiously is moving the nuclear program forward?
Unfortunately, that's not my area of expertise. I'm going to defer to my colleagues on that question.
Mr. Roule, I think you've been nominated.
Minimal.
Minimal.
Minimal. It's not how the country works. It's a very small circle of people, and it's extremely unlikely something like that would happen without his knowledge.
Okay, very good. So regime change, I've heard that discussed here. I think that's a horrible concept. Because we haven't defeated a nation for decades now. But we do know that there have been several uprisings in Iran, and they are put down brutally. So how in the world do we encourage the people of Iran to actually go through the pain to change the regime? Is that possible? Because we're assuming some external force, the U.S. or somebody else, will have to make this happen. Because if we do have a successor to the Ayatollah standing in the wings, how do we encourage them to do this themselves?
The people of Iran need to know that America stands with them, but we need to be very careful and cautious as to how we do this, because people are risking their lives. They will pay a terrific price in the prisons of Iran, at the hands of Iran's extraordinarily cruel security forces when they're punished, and we need to be very careful that we aren't too cavalier about how this is handled. It's up to the people of Iran to determine their future, and as they do take steps to change that future, they need to know that we will support them and perhaps even provide safe haven if they need security. If in such a situation, but we just need to be careful on how we move forward, because if there is a situation where they're caught in the hands of Iran's security, they will be handled very roughly.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. At this time, we recognize the representative of Delaware, Rep. McBride.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Chairman. Thank you very much to our witnesses for your perseverance with us today. Around the world, we are watching a clash unfold between democratic values and authoritarian oppression. From Europe to the Middle East to this very continent, this is the story of our moment: democracy versus authoritarianism. Iran sits at the center of a growing alliance of authoritarianism, an axis that includes not only hostile nation states like Russia and China, but also a network of terrorist organizations and armed militias across the Middle East. Iran props up groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. using them as tools to destabilize democracies and challenge U.S. interests. This is a part of Iran's global strategy to expand authoritarian influence and erode the norms of international law and human rights. And while we sit here warning of Iranian malign activities, President Trump's national security team has been carelessly handling classified and mission-sensitive information about the Houthis in open. The problem isn't just that they mistakenly added a reporter to a text chain. The bigger problem is that these officials, some of the most surveilled people on the planet, were communicating in a way that allowed that mistake to even happen. How many signal chats contain sensitive or classified material right now? How many have occurred over the last several months? Reporters may not have been able to see them, but Iran, Russia, and China very easily could. It is entirely possible that Iran or one of its partners was following along on the signal chat that we know about. And because of that, it is a miracle. It is a miracle that we are not mourning dead American troops right now. Had there been a retaliation waiting in response because of that breach, that could have handed the Houthis and Iran a major victory. That's not just embarrassing, it was dangerous. As Hamas is weakened and Iran looks to recalibrate its strategy, we must ensure that Iran does not have additional proxies to fall back on. I'm proud to co-lead the bipartisan bicameral Accountability for Terrorist Perpetrators of October 7th Act, introduced by my colleagues Representatives Sherman and Lawler, which would finally sanction the Popular Resistance Committees, a brutal terrorist organization in Gaza and an active participant in the horrific attacks in Israel on October 7th. These terrorists have carried out attacks against Americans, Israelis, and Palestinians for decades, and their deep ties to Hamas make them a credible candidate for Iran if they are looking to increase support for other proxies in the region. So, Mr. Roule, my question for you is, despite having been responsible for American civilians being murdered since 2003, the Popular Resistance Committees has never been sanctioned. As Iran adjusts its strategy in response to the weakening of its primary proxies, how should the U.S. government and our allies monitor and preempt the rise of new or lesser-known Iranian-backed groups that could fill a vacuum?
Superb question. And I go back to a previous statement. As long as the Quds Force exists as an organization created to sponsor militias and terrorists, we will see more and more of this. There are Quds Force training camps in Iran designed to train multinational terrorists to, in essence, go out and become train-the-trainer individuals. Some of the best training Iran provides to the Houthis, to Hezbollah and others is provided within Iran itself. Until Iran is compelled to change the Quds Force itself, we are fated to deal with this issue. So I would encourage legislation that insists that our partners in Europe and the region do what they can to constrain Iran's from the Quds Force's activity. Until this happens, we are fated to watch this movie play again and again.
Thank you. And quickly, Ms. Stroul, given Iran's strategy of using proxies to destabilize fragile democracies and suppress civil society from Lebanon to Iraq, how can the U.S. more effectively support democratic institutions and counteract the malign influence of these authoritarian-backed actors?
The ability of societies and communities to be resilient in the face of what the Iranians will try to do, which is reconstitute their threat network, is to empower our diplomats and our development assistance professionals. So that would particularly be the U.S. Agency for International Development, and to allow our diplomats to do what they do best, which is political and diplomatic engagement.
Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. I ought to remind, just for clarification, Rep. McBride, that those sitting in the chair are chairman or chairwoman. There's no acting. And so I would assume that we know the difference between real and acting. And at this time, I'll recognize the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Shreve.
Thank you, Mr. Gentleman in the chair. I appreciate the testimony from the witnesses. I know it's been a long afternoon. I appreciate that. Ms. Jungman, nearly 3 hours ago, as we opened up you discussed the establishment of the Global Maritime No-Dock list as a means of curtailing this shadow fleet. What might the U.S. do to encourage other countries to uphold this no-dock list at their ports?
Thank you for bringing that up, and thank you for the question. I think it's important to recognize, again, that there are Western entities touching the vessels involved in this activity, whether that's the classification society, the flag state. Classification societies, for example, have offices here in the U.S., or the flag states that, provide the flags to these vessels. We can essentially say none of their vessels would be able to sail into the U.S. For example, if that's Panama or Comoros or Cook Islands, if we said if you're going to continue to flag these vessels, your vessels will not be able to come to the U.S. So I think there's a number of different ways that we can encourage them. But essentially, then the thought behind the no sail list, or kind of monitored off a no fly list, is that sanction, the enforcement of sanctions can take time, and having this list of vessels that are involved in this type of activity would send a warning and hopefully deter them from offloading their oil at different areas.
So in a way, that deterrence would be secondhand. They can't prescribe those vessels on the no-dock list directly at foreign ports, but we could get to the bad actor states by prohibiting their docking into our ports. Is that a fair characterization? All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, sir. I yield back.
Thank you so much. At this time, we recognize the gentlelady from South Carolina, Rep. Biggs.
Thank you, sir, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. So the denuclearization of Iran remains a cornerstone of U.S. policy, and it's critical to ensuring regional stability and global security, given Iran's history of pursuing nuclear capabilities that threaten its neighbors and the international community. The Obama administration's Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA, notably failed to achieve this goal, as it allowed Iran to retain significant nuclear infrastructure and did not mandate the verifiable dismantlement of its nuclear weapons program. Moreover, the Obama administration sought to obligate the United States to remove key sanctions on Iran, notably those with Section 1245 of fiscal year 2012 NDAA, which enforce significant financial and oil restrictions. The Obama administration's agreement boiled down to a trade, which simply stated temporary nuclear restriction in exchange for permanent sanctions relief. Yet these efforts fell well short of the denuclearization standard mandated by the CISADA, a bill signed into law by President Obama, which explicitly requires Iran to cease the pursuit, acquisition, and development of nuclear weapons and to dismantle its nuclear program as one of a number of conditions terminating significant U.S. sanctions. The law's mandate is clear and indisputable, and the Obama administration's agreement fell significantly short, raising serious concerns about its effectiveness and security implications for the United States and for our allies. Only strict adherence to the law will ensure the permanent removal of nuclear threat from Iran. So my question is simple. To each of our witnesses, I just want to know, does anyone disagree with this fundamental principle? And I'll start with Mr. Roule.
And I'm sorry, ma'am, could you give the question simply, please?
I just want to know if you disagree or agree with this fundamental principle.
Of?
What I just stated about what the Obama, how we fell short and how it affects us now.
You are correct, ma'am. The JCPOA provided permanent sanctions relief and permanent relief of a number of restrictions in return for, in many cases, temporary or finite restrictions on Iran's nuclear program, and with a government of malign individuals who sponsored proxies, did a number of oppressive activities against their own people, and led us to the current state where we are today. And if I can go just a little farther, in essence, the problem with JCPOA is it's become an issue about us, and when it should be an issue about Iran. Okay, this was Iran's chance to turn a new chapter in its history, and it didn't, and it's Iran's fault. Okay, and that's the issue here. So yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
I would agree with the comments made by Mr. Roule.
I would also agree, and I think it's even more important that whatever deal is contemplated and negotiated this year has to be much stronger than the JCPOA, particularly because of the perilous advances in Iran's nuclear program today.
Absolutely. I believe that's why our past is so important to pay attention to as we move forward. And thank you to our witnesses, and I yield back my time.
Thank you so much. I want to thank our witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The member of the committees may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we may ask you to respond to these in writing. Pursuant to committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length limitations. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.